Whispers of the Mountain. A Forever Series novel. Written by Arabella Vaughan. Published by Silent Voice Heard UK. Preface. They say the mountain chooses who it keeps. And who it breaks. I was never meant to be here, not truly. Not with this blood. Not with this name. But still, I stayed. I learned to move quietly. To listen when the wind carried secrets, when the trees whispered things meant only for me. Then he came. And for the first time, the earth stirred beneath my feet. What followed it wasn't simple. It wasn't safe. But it was real. I shouldn't have looked at him. I shouldn't have let him look back. But I did. And everything changed.
Perched high in the northern range, where clouds brushed the peaks and the wind spoke in whispers, Mount Haven Lodge was nestled into the mountain, as if it, and the many smaller buildings scattered through the range, had lived there for centuries. Stone and timber were swallowed by ivy and moss. Chimneys exhaled soft ribbons of smoke into the cold air. Outside, on the tall trees, lanterns swayed from the branches, glowing gold in the twilight like stars that had come down to rest among the leaves. The Defender's electric hum faded as the truck rolled to a stop on the gravel path just in front of the main lodge. Taren stepped out into the crisp pine-laced air. The door closed behind him with a soft magnetic click. He rolled his shoulders, stretching the stiffness from his neck, then opened the back to grab his bag. His boots met the earth with a quiet crunch. He paused. The air settled around him. As he slung the bag over one shoulder, a gust of wind tugged at the hem of his jacket and brought with it the scent of damp earth and firewood. Somewhere nearby, a hawk screamed high in the sky. He looked up, tracking it. This place felt old. Alive. Like it was watching him back. And deep beneath the soles of his boots, the mountain stirred. His boots crunched on the gravel driveway as he approached the front door. He adjusted the strap of his bag and looked up at the imposing peaks that encircled the valley like ancient sentinels. His father, Alpha Tennu, was already walking ahead of him, not waiting. "Keep your head down," Tennu muttered as Taren caught up. "You're here to make your mark, not gawk like a tourist." Taren bit back the dozen responses that bubbled up and settled on sarcasm. "I wasn't planning on taking photos, if that's what you're worried about." Tennu gave him a flat look. "You weren't meant to be here at all." Taren didn't reply. He knew this all too well. As they stepped through the open doors, they heard voices echoing in the cooling evening. Inside, the alphas were already gathering. Long wooden tables lined the hall, polished and set with earth-toned linens. Young members of each family moved between them, setting down platters of food and jugs of forest wine. At the entrance, 3 men stood like carved statues. Rhilor's sons. Kale, the eldest, had shoulders like a bear and a smirk like he knew how to break bones without leaving marks. Taren, lean and hawk-eyed, gave off the constant air of evaluation. And Nico, the youngest, was almost forgettable until you looked into his deep green eyes which caught every movement around him. Their gazes fixed on Taren as he passed. Kale smirked. Taren raised an eyebrow. Nico said nothing. Taren didn't break stride. He was used to being sized up. He just wasn't used to it mattering. Taren slipped away as another speech droned on, its words heavy and suffocating. The air felt thick with the weight of too many bodies crammed into one space, the scent of cologne, sweat, and burnt wood mixing in a dull haze. He couldn't focus on the words, just the hum of voices that blurred together like static. Too much talk. Too much performance. The walls of the hall seemed to close in on him, and he felt pinned, trapped by their expectations. Pretending to follow one of the Rhilor women's guided tours, he let the crowd sweep him forward. His skin tingled with the press of strangers, their heat radiating in waves. As the air grew thick with chatter, he slipped away. He ducked into the shadows near the greenhouse. The structure rose like a cathedral of glass and moss-covered stone behind the lodge. The heavy wooden door creaked slightly as he eased it open. The lightly scented air and damp earth beneath his boots a welcome relief from the oppressive heat inside. A soft buzzing filled the air, bees dozing in the lavender, their tiny wings shimmering. Crickets sang softly from beneath thick leaf beds. Light filtered through glass streaked with condensation and ivy. He leaned against the cool glass, letting the calm settle into his bones. He inhaled slowly, the first real breath he'd taken since arriving. Movement stirred in the far corner. A figure crouched near a planter bed, one hand deep in the soil. He stepped forward. "Good evening," he said. She made no effort to reply. "My apologies, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're standing in my light," she said evenly. He stepped aside, amused. "Better?" She glanced over her shoulder, her dark curls swept back into a thick braid, some strands falling loose to frame her face in soft waves. Her features were delicate but defined, high cheekbones, a straight nose, and full lips that carried the faintest curve, as if she was always on the verge of a smile. Her skin, though smudged with dirt, held a natural glow, warm golden that seemed to catch the light and make her look as if she belonged to the mountain itself. Her eyes, a striking shade of green, flicked over him, with quiet curiosity. "You're not from here. Has the gathering started already?" "Taren," he offered. A rabbit nosed its way out of a patch of thyme and brushed against his leg. She didn't look at it. "I didn't ask." He chuckled. "Fair enough." She went back to tending the soil, and for a moment, it was as though he wasn't there at all. But then she said quietly, "You don't smell like this place. Should I be insulted?" She shrugged. "That depends. Where are you from?" "Western Slopes," he answered. "The Tenus," she muttered under her breath. "Yes, my father is Alpha Tenu," he said. He expected her to react, but she carried on. He stood watching her, shifting his weight from one foot to another, unsure if he should make his excuses or not. Just as he was about to leave, she turned and glanced up. He shifted his gaze as if inspecting the plants. He saw her evaluate him. He was used to this, women staring, gawping at him. He hated their looks, like he was just the sum of his exterior. They never cared about what was within him, especially not now, not as an unbonded future alpha. She stood, wiping the dirt from her dress, and gave him a short nod. "Enjoy your party," she said. He watched her leave, his eyebrows raised. What an odd little creature she was. Then he realized she hadn't given him her name. The day had been long, and Taren was eager to retreat to his room, but the evening continued on, so he kept a practiced smile on his face as he moved between the many groups. Music carried through the trees, woven into the light breeze filtering through the lit fires and hum of chatter from the many groups. Just beyond the clearing, leaning against a tree where the firelight barely reached, he saw her again. She'd changed clothing. Her dress was dark, simple, but it moved with her, tracing the shape of her body with quiet grace. Her hair swept up into a loose elegant knot, exposing the gentle slope of her neck. She stood with her arms folded, relaxed, almost indifferent. As if she were part of the forest itself, meant to be there, whether anyone noticed or not. The shadows seemed to welcome her. The light only barely touched her, softening her edges until she looked more like a memory than something real. He watched her, unsure why. There was no performance in her, no expectation. Just presence. Steady. Self-contained. She didn't need the room's attention. And maybe that's what caught him. She reminded him of something he couldn't quite name, something he'd forgotten how to be. Still. Unbothered. It made him wonder how someone could carry themselves like that. Like they didn't need the world to see them to know who they were. When was the last time he'd felt anything close to that? The thought rooted itself in his chest, quiet and persistent. He didn't know her. Not really. But something about the way she stood in the half-light made him feel like maybe she saw things others didn't. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he wanted to be seen by her. Her eyes flicked up from the ground then, and for the briefest moment, their gazes locked. Taren felt his breath catch in his chest, as if the air around them had shifted. Her eyes were wide, dark, almost like deep pools of night. There was something else there, something that made his pulse race for a split second. Something golden. The briefest flash, so quick he might have imagined it, but it was enough to stop him in his tracks. She blinked, then immediately looked away, her expression unreadable. But Taren could still feel the echo of that connection, like an invisible thread that had pulled taut between them. It was like nothing he had ever experienced, like the world had paused, just for a moment, to let them both recognize something unspoken. It made no sense. He didn't know her. She was a quiet figure in the background. But now, standing there in the shadows, she had become more. She was someone he needed to know. He took a hesitant step forward, the noise of the gathering fading behind him as he moved toward the edge of the firelight. He wasn't sure what he intended to say or do, only that he wanted, no needed, to talk to her. "A pleasure to see you again," he said, standing next to her. She remained quiet. "Everyone's either dancing or drinking," he continued. "Are you not in the mood on this fine evening?" She adjusted her position slightly, her body language still closed off but less rigid. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she spoke. "I'm allergic to both," she replied. He chuckled, then leaned against the tree beside her. For a while, neither spoke. It was easy. Easier than it should have been. But Taren couldn't shake the feeling that there was something about her he didn't understand. Something hidden in the quiet, in the stillness of her presence. They all know each other, he murmured after a while, his eyes flicking over to where people laughed and mingled in the distance. Her gaze followed his, but she didn't say anything right away. Instead, she gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. They do, she sighed. They all think they know me, her voice soft, tinged with something he couldn't quite read. Taren's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, she spoke again, her tone lighter this time. But I don't let them in. What an odd thing to say about your own family, he thought. He turned to look at her. The firelight brushed her face in fragments, casting shifting shadows. She wasn't just speaking about the people at the gathering, she was speaking about something deeper. About herself. There was an ache in her words, a sadness that she hid behind her quiet strength. Just as the question formed, a young man waved him over to a group just heading inside. He nodded and turned to the girl, but she was gone. He looked into the trees behind him. He huffed, but aware of watching eyes, he turned and strolled over to his new friend. The morning light filtered through the thick canopy of trees, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. It was late spring, with summer on the horizon, with the air thick with the scent of pine and the faint sweetness of wildflowers. The kind of warmth that whispered of pleasurable days ahead. Taren stood near the clearing, just at the edge of the lodge, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath his boots. The first day of meetings were due to begin very soon. Behind him he listened to the buzz of activity that filled the air. Servants and attendants scurried to prepare the space, wooden tables being set with fine linens, pitchers of chilled fruit-infused water waiting for the guests to arrive. Now, the weight of duty and expectation began to sit heavy on his shoulders. Last night had been enough, he had felt the pressure of every alpha's eyes on him, despite their smiles and warm words. As he stood there lost in thought, a familiar voice cut through the air like a sharp edge. Ah, Tenu's son finally shows his face. Taren turned to find Kale, the older son of Rhilor, strolling over with that confident, almost playful swagger. His tall form moved with ease, a grin creeping onto his lips like something mischievous. What did you think of the party last night? A bit of a quiet affair for my taste really, but each to their own. His voice was smooth, a soft laugh following his words. He was followed by Taren, who remained as quiet, and Nico, the youngest, who had yet to speak to him, his gaze far away just like it had been last night. Taren raised an eyebrow, already knowing where this conversation was headed. I'm not sure what you're implying, Kale. You didn't seem to mind the quiet last night. Kale chuckled, the sound light but with an undercurrent of something darker. Oh, I'm all for quiet, he said, sidling closer with a half smirk. But then again, I like a little more action with my parties. You know, things like making an impression. But don't worry, Taren. You've got time to figure that part out. Right, Taren replied dryly. I'll keep that in mind. Kale's grin only widened, clearly amused by the exchange. He flicked his gaze to the side, then turned back to Taren with a tone of faux sympathy. You don't have to put on a front. I get it. It must be tough, living in the shadow of someone who's already left his mark. You were the spare, after all. Taren stiffened slightly but kept his expression neutral. He wasn't going to take the bait. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you're trying to make friends. Kale's eyes glinted with amusement, the playful tone still lingering beneath his words. Who says we can't be friends? He clapped him lightly on the shoulder, the gesture oddly warm, but with the kind of pressure that made Taren feel as though Kale were trying to squeeze something out of him. After all, you're a close family friend, aren't you? Nothing wrong with looking out for each other. Taren didn't flinch, though his lips twisted slightly. Right, he said. Looking out for each other. That's what friends do. Kale's smile sharpened, and Taren shifted, the usual coolness in his expression deepening. Nico remained silent, as always, but his eyes flickered between the two brothers, his posture unreadable. We should keep an eye on you, Kale continued, leaning in just a little, his voice lower, a touch more serious now, though it still held that sweet, dangerous undertone. Not everyone's as lucky as you to have a trusting father. Some of us have to make our own way. But, hey, I'm sure you'll do fine. We all have to step up eventually, don't we? Thanks for the advice, Taren said, his voice calm, though there was a steel edge to it now. I'll keep that in mind. Kale studied him for a long moment, his smirk never wavering, though there was something calculating behind his eyes now. Oh, I'm sure you will, he said, straightening. Just remember, forevers look out for each other. With that, Kale turned, taking Taren with him, Nico trailing behind. But before Kale disappeared into the crowd, he called back over his shoulder. See you at the table, my friend. Don't disappoint us. He stood there for a moment, his jaw tight. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not here. As the brothers walked away, the girl with the dark hair passed them carrying a tray of herbal infusions. She moved quietly, as always. Cale turned his grin on her. Look who's gracing us with mud water. Better than the bile that comes out your mouth, she replied calmly. Cale stepped forward, eyes narrowing, but Nico pulled him away muttering something low. Then they were gone. Next time, dear cousin, he called after her. Taren stepped forward following the path she had taken, but she was gone too. He stood there for a moment, his jaw tight. Cale had said cousin, he had never heard of a cousin. He shook his head, not now. He couldn't be distracted by a girl, no matter how much he felt the pull towards her. But he knew that there was no cousin, so who was this girl who looked like family, but her actions felt more of a maid? He finally allowed himself a deep breath. He needed to refocus. He wasn't about to let Cale's friendly facade fool him. Cale was the kind of person who'd smile while he twisted a knife. Sighing, Taren turned back toward the lodge. There was no time to dwell on games. The elders would be arriving soon, and the real pressure would begin. He stood by the open window of his room enjoying a brief moment of silence. Meetings by day, whispered politics by night, endless cups of bitter tea, and the constant game of posture and poise. The forest surrounding Mount Haven felt like a cage made of leaves and carved stone. Taren was doing well, his father had even said as much in his own quiet, grudgingly way. But the performance was wearing thin. Still, he was tired. Of being watched. Of posturing. Of never letting his shoulders drop. And she hadn't been there. He hadn't seen her in the Great Hall, not in the gardens, not even at the ceremonial breakfast where the Rhilor family made their rounds like royalty. Once, he'd caught a glimpse of her across a courtyard, basket in hand, head lowered, curls pinned up. She hadn't looked his way. He told himself it didn't matter, what is this girl to him? It had just been one moment. Just a girl with a sharp tongue. But this morning, something pulled him from his bed before the rest of the valley had stirred. He slipped from the lodge and into the mist-wrapped forest. The trees stood still and tall, their branches trailing the first warm breath of summer. The ground beneath him was soft and damp, the air smelling of river stones and sweet moss. Taren followed the soft path beneath the birch trees, shaking off the weight of too many days spent nodding through diplomacy and pretending to care more than he did. The silence was a balm. Then he stopped. Just beyond the birches, in a hollow ringed with dew-glinting grass, she stood barefoot, her pale dress brushing her ankles like shadow and wind. Her curls were unbound this time, wild around her shoulders. One hand rested lightly on a slender tree trunk, the other dangled at her side. Her head was tilted up, eyes closed, face soft in the half-light. For a moment, Taren forgot to breathe. She was so still, it looked like she was listening to something. Not just the trees. Something deeper. As if she felt the air shift, she turned. Her green eyes found his across the clearing. A sharp, mossy green that seemed to cut right through the early morning haze. For a long breath, they stared at each other. A quiet thread stretching between them in the silence. Then, something shifted. Her eyes changed. From green to gold, so suddenly and so vividly it stole the breath from his chest. A flicker, then a bloom of light inside them, glowing from within like sunlight through amber. Taren blinked, his pulse thudding in his ears. Did your eyes just... No, she interrupted him. Before he could say more, she turned and walked away, quick and quiet, the wet grass swallowing the sound of her footsteps. She didn't look back. The moment shattered, slipping through his fingers before he even knew how to hold it. He stood there. His heartbeat knocked hard against his ribs, echoing what he'd just seen. That glow. That impossible golden glow. Among the foreverborn, it meant something. Something rare. Something undeniable. When in the moment of emotion, grief, anger, desire. So full it couldn't be contained their eyes. But most often, a soul connection. What did it mean in her eyes, in that moment? And why did she flee like the truth of it terrified her? He didn't have the answers. Not yet. But something had cracked open between them, he felt it. Whatever this was, whatever it meant, it wasn't over. Not even close.
The scent of crushed thyme lingered on her fingers as she leaned in to pluck a stubborn weed from between the roots of a flowering ginger plant. The greenhouse was warm, the glass fogged with the breath of the earth, sunlight streaming in soft and golden through the upper windows. Time moved differently in here, fluid, unhurried. Hours often passed without her noticing. She didn't hear the door open at first. Just the faint creak of the hinges, like a breath being drawn in too sharply. Her body tensed. Then she felt it. A shift, Subtle, but unmistakable. Like the air had thickened, charged with something electric. Her breath caught. She didn't have to turn around to know someone was there. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs, her pulse thundering in her ears. Her skin prickled, alive with awareness. She could feel his gaze before he spoke, before he moved. She turned her head slightly, still crouched low among the raised beds. A figure stood just inside the threshold, tall, broad-shouldered, framed by the lantern light that cast him in gold. Not family. Not staff. And definitely not expected. It had only taken one look. Her body had reacted before her mind could catch up. Every muscle screamed at her to move toward him. The way his presence seemed to fill the space, the sharp cut of his jaw, the steady cadence of his breathing, everything about him pulled her in like gravity. It was the first time she'd felt that powerful reaction to anyone. And that scared her. She couldn't look at him again. She needed to run, to get away. But her body wouldn't let her. It was as though her mind and heart had collided, every part of her knowing they were drawn to him, yet every other part screaming no. She couldn't let it happen. She wasn't supposed to feel that way. Her heart was a rapidly beating drum in her chest, and the moment he approached, his energy like fire against her cool calm, she nearly faltered. She wiped her hands absently on her apron, annoyed at herself for being startled, for losing track of time. The gathering. Of course. The guest had arrived. "You're standing in my light," she said evenly, relieved to hear her voice calm despite the rapid beating of her heart. He stepped aside, the corner of his mouth twitching into amusement. "Better?" She didn't look at him directly. Instead, her eyes found his reflection in the curved surface of a metal watering can that she had in front of her. Light pooled around him like lantern glowing in moonlight, catching on the edges of his features. His sharp jaw, windswept hair and broad shoulders wrapped in a travel-worn jacket. He looked out of place among the soft green things, like someone carved from stone wandering into a dream. "You're not from here," she said, half to herself. "Has the gathering started already?" He nodded. "Taren," he offered his name. She blinked. The name meant something, but not immediately. Her heart steadied as she turned back to her work, fingers tracing the soil like it could ground her again. A rabbit nosed its way out from beneath the mint, brushed past her foot, then lingered near him. She didn't comment on it. "I didn't ask," she said softly. He laughed under his breath. It was a good sound. "You don't smell like this place," she added, still not looking at him. "Should I be insulted?" She shrugged, still working. "Depends. Where are you from?" "Western Slopes." She went still. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped in water. Her stomach tightened. "The Tenus," she muttered. "My father is Alpha Tenu," he said. Of course he was his son. A cold knot twisted in her stomach. It felt like the mountain itself had exhaled, shifting, groaning under the weight of a future that was never meant for her. Her fingers dug harder into the soil, her breath growing shallow. He didn't leave. He lingered, shifting his weight like he didn't know what to do next. And neither did she. His presence behind her was magnetic, an ache just beneath her skin. Every instinct pulled her toward him, like the roots of the forest reaching toward water, but she resisted. She had to. This couldn't be happening. What would the family say? Her mother had been Alpha Rhilor's half-sister from his father's second marriage. The siblings had never been close, and then, when the family found out she was pregnant by a human, it had caused an uproar. Rhilor had tried to help, she was with child, after all, even if it was partially human. But she'd had their father's stubbornness and refused all offers of support. She had only lived a few days after Sena's birth. Complications. No one ever told her what kind. It didn't matter. Her mother was gone. Her father had never come forward. And it fell to her uncle to raise her, an obligation that none wanted. She had nothing to offer anyone. Nothing that would ever be enough. Someone like Taren, who belonged to the mountains, to his family, to the role of alpha that would someday be thrust upon him, he wasn't for her. She would only ever be a stain. An outsider in a world that would never fully claim her. But had she felt the bond? That impossible connection she experienced when their eyes met, sharp and undeniable? No, she couldn't risk feeling it. Couldn't even think it. And so, with her throat tight and her hands shaking, she rose quickly to her feet, brushed past the herbs, and turned from him and fled, tears stinging her eyes. As she reached her quarters, her chest tight with panic, she had to fight against the urge to run back to him. She could feel his presence, like heat on her skin. She slammed the door and flung herself onto her bed, laying there trying to catch her breath. How could it be? The moment their eyes met, everything inside her reacted. She saw it, too, the gold. His eyes glowed for the briefest of seconds. But he hadn't reacted. He looked amused. But to her, this wasn't just an attraction. It was the beginning of something she didn't understand. Something she couldn't handle. The midday light filtered through the high canopy in golden shards, dancing on the stone paths that wove between the lodges. Mount Haven was quieter than usual, most of the elders were in meetings, and many of the younger guests had scattered into the woods or the gathering fields beyond. Sena had taken the opportunity to walk to the herb shed near the edge of the compound. She carried a small woven basket ready to be filled with produce, her hand steady even as her pulse quickened with each step. She wasn't supposed to be nervous. She belonged here. At least, that's what she told herself. Again and again. She had almost made it back when the voices stopped her. Carrying mud again, little one. Kale's voice slithered around the corner before his hulking form followed it. He leaned casually against the shed, arms crossed, watching her with the smugness of someone who knew exactly where her weak spots were. Taren stood beside him, more silent but no less amused, flicking a knife between his fingers in idle rhythm. Sena didn't flinch. She had long learned that reaction only made it worse. Just doing what needs to be done, she said simply, trying to move past. Kale shifted to block her path, a lopsided grin on his face. And here I thought you were trying to impress us with your green fingers. Her fingers tightened slightly on the basket handle, but her face remained neutral. I don't have time for this. You never do you? Taren said, stepping a little closer. Always slipping away. Like you think you're better than the rest of us. I don't, she said. I just like the quiet. Kale leaned in a little. Careful, Sena. Quiet things get stepped on around here. His tone was light. Almost friendly. But there was weight behind the words, a warning cloaked in sugar. It was the same tone he used with the new forevers who hadn't learned their place. The same tone he used when he wanted you to feel small while he smiled in your face. She didn't answer. A few feet away, Nico sat perched on the low stone wall, half hidden behind a clump of tall ferns. He was watching, but he didn't move. Didn't speak. Their eyes met for a brief second. He looked away. Tell me something, Kale continued, tipping his head as if genuinely curious. Do you really think anyone will look twice at someone like you? A mutt from a broken line, you're not even true blood. Sena's breath caught, but she didn't let it show. As if I have time or want of anyone, she said softly, stepping forward. She walked through the small space he left open, brushing past him with a calm that took everything she had to summon. Behind her, Kale chuckled. Feisty. Taren's voice followed, low and cold. She always is. Sena didn't stop walking until she was back beneath the trees, where the light filtered softer and the air felt less sharp. Her hands shook now. Not from fear, but from the rage she couldn't release. The burn of being less in their eyes. The reminder that no matter how long she had been here, no matter how many roots she'd laid in this place, she wasn't family. She was tolerated. But she'd never be accepted. She closed her eyes, sucking in a shaky breath. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. Not as the girl who was pushed around by Kale's jokes and sly comments. Not the girl who flinched and smiled and hid in greenhouses just to keep breathing. She would rather disappear than be pitied. Her hands clenched at her sides, nails biting into her palms. The sting helped. Anchored her? She forced her shoulders back, spine straightening like a sapling willing itself not to bend in the wind. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not for him. Let them believe she didn't feel a thing. That Kale's words hadn't scraped against old wounds and reopened things she'd buried deep. Let them think she was stone. She turned away from the corridor, away from the echo of his laughter, and slipped through a side door, her footsteps silent on the worn stone floor. She just needed somewhere private. Somewhere she could remember who she was.
Taren wandered the edge of the compound, grateful to be outside. Every meeting felt the same, too many voices, too many opinions for him to navigate through. He was trying his best. His father had actually nodded at him that morning. Approval. That was new. He rounded the corner of the central path, heading toward the lower gardens, when he caught sight of movement through the trees. He'd wanted to ask, someone had to know who she was. But something held him back. A quiet instinct, deep in his chest, warning him not to chase it too hard. Not yet. She was walking quickly, head down, basket pressed against her hip. Her braid was slightly unraveling, her shoulders hunched just enough to suggest she didn't want to be seen. He slowed, watching. She reached the grove near the smaller greenhouse and paused beside a low stone wall. For a moment she just stood there, motionless. Then, as if something inside her cracked, she exhaled sharply and dropped to sit on the wall, burying her face in her hands. He took a step forward, instinct rising, but then stopped himself. He wasn't sure what he'd say. She barely spoke to him as it was. And whatever was happening with her in this moment, it wasn't his place to get involved. Still, something tugged at him. A thread he couldn't name. Not pity. Something else. Something that had started that first moment he'd seen her in the greenhouse and had only grown since. He wanted to know what made her shoulders set like that. What had shaken the girl with gold in her eyes. And more than anything, he wanted her to look at him again the way she had in the greenhouse. When she stood and continued on her way, he remained still, aware that any movement on his part could alert her to his presence. Then when out of sight he turned, heading back toward the path. Whatever was happening, he'd figure it out. He had to. With the meetings winding down and agreements in place, the mood shifted. Families began to wander beyond the lodge, enjoying the fresh air and company. Taren finally had time to himself. No meetings. No watchful father. He was now determined to find her. He searched the grounds until he saw her slipping between the trees. Without a word, he followed. "Do you always do that?" she said when he fell in step beside her. "What?" he asked, feigning innocence. "Follow people." Her reply was quick. "Only the ones who keep running," he tried to joke. In his ears it sounded creepier than he had meant it. She narrowed her eyes but didn't stop him from walking beside her. "I've had many tours of the grounds," he begun, "but really would like to see something that is truly the estate. Will you show me?" She hesitated, shrugged and started walking. They moved in silence for a time, weaving between narrow deer trails and places where the mountain roots twisted up from the soil like ancient bones. The air grew cooler, damper, as they passed under shadowed canopies and over stones slick with moss. After a while, he spoke again, quietly, as though afraid of shattering the peace between them. "You never told me your name." She didn't stop walking, but something in her shoulders stiffened. She kept her gaze forward as she answered, "Sena." He repeated it softly to himself. "Sena." Finally, they reached a cliff edge. The view stretched out below them, rolling green valleys soft with morning mist, distant peaks layered in fading shades of blue, and a silver ribbon of river winding lazily through it all like a forgotten thread in the earth's tapestry. From this height, the world looked impossibly vast and achingly still. "This is mine," she said softly. "No one else comes here." She stepped closer to the ledge, the ground falling away sharply beneath her feet. Grass and wild thyme clung stubbornly to the rocks, dancing in the wind, roots gripping ancient stone. He looked it out as a breeze stirred at the edge of the cliff, carrying the sharp scent of pine and the faint, metallic tang of stone warmed by the sun. "It's beautiful," he said. "I know." He turned to her. "So are you." She remained still, only her fingers moved, grazing the stone beside her. His eyes flickered down, seeing the tiny blossoms springing to life in the cracks beneath the wake of her fingers. "You're not just a gardener." She turned to face him. "I shadowed. I'm a mistake. A half-blood. Daughter of a human who didn't know better. They keep me because I have nowhere else to go. Not because they want me." The weight of her words settled between them like fog. "You're more than that," he said. "You don't know what I am. I know what I see." She shrugged and continued to stare out over the mountain tops. He watched how she stood with her arms wrapped around herself. Her braid fluttered in the wind, strands of dark hair lifting like smoke. She didn't speak. Didn't fidget. Just stood. Like she belonged here more than anywhere else. And now that he knew, now that he understood who she was, everything inside him twisted. Alpha Rhilor's niece. The half-human girl. The one with no clear place in the mountain's hierarchy. Of all the ladies present, he had been drawn to her. He hadn't planned on noticing anyone. But he had. And now, this. A complication. Taren swallowed hard, jaw tightening. One day, he would inherit his father's mantle. Alpha of the Western Slopes. A territory known for its strength, its lineage, its traditions. There were expectations. Alliances. Responsibilities that went deeper than preference or chance. And Sena? She wasn't even a full forever. His chest felt too tight, like the wind had turned inward. He looked away, back to the endless stretch of green and sky, pretending it didn't matter. Pretending it wasn't already too late to pretend.
The cliff had stayed with her. Even now, as she sat in her small room under the slanted eaves, brushing her hair with a slow, thoughtful rhythm, she could still feel the way the wind had wrapped around them like a hush. How the mountain stretched endlessly ahead while Taren stood beside her, not asking too many questions, just being there, with her. And then he'd asked her name. And said it like it mattered. They had talked for hours, she had answered him honestly, without fear of being taunted. He had told her about his family, he did not admit it, but he was still mourning the loss of his brother. She stared at her reflection in the old mirror propped against the windowsill. Her cheeks still held the faintest flush. She hated that she'd smiled so easily with him, spoken more than she meant to. When she was near him, her body buzzed like the air before a summer storm, dangerous and alive. She didn't know what he wanted from her. She didn't know what she wanted from him. But he made her feel seen. Like she wasn't just part of the roots and shadows. A knock rattled her door. "Come in," she called, though her voice was barely more than a breath. Her cousin Lanny stepped inside, eyes flicking to the dress laid out on the bed. Deep forest green, embroidered with golden thread that caught the fading light. It looked expensive. Regal, almost. "He really got this for you?" Lanny asked. Sena nodded. "Said I had to go tonight. For appearances." "Isn't that what everything is?" Lanny muttered, but she smiled faintly. "You'll look beautiful in it." Sena didn't answer. Her stomach churned. Her uncle had dropped off the dress that morning without a word. Just a glance. One of those long, unreadable looks that always left her unsettled. She never knew what he saw when he looked at her, if he saw her at all. Sometimes it felt like he was looking through her. Or at something he wished wasn't there. That stare stayed with her, long after he left. And she hated how those gestures, grand as they were, left her hollow. The dress was stunning. The fabric soft. The stitching fine. But it wasn't for her. Not really. It was about presentation. Control. Optics. It was always about the family. And still, she'd wear it. Because not wearing it, that was never really a choice. The grounds had come alive beneath the stars. Bonfires blazed like living things, pulsing to the rhythm of drums and laughter. Lanterns drifted high above the clearing, glowing orbs that looked like captive stars, their light dancing on every face. Tables bowed under the abundance of roasted roots, honey-glazed breads, herb-studded cheeses, and glistening forest fruits. Sena stood just beyond the edge of it all, half in shadow. Her heart thudded faster than the drums echoing through the trees. The firelight caught the fabric of her dress and made it shimmer with every breath she took. Her curls were pinned up with delicate golden leaves. She felt the shift as people passed, their eyes lingering on her, before moving on. Her spine stiffened. She resisted the urge to shrink into herself. They didn't see her, not really. Just the image someone else had dressed her up to be. She hated it. Her thoughts scattered as Kale's voice rang out, smooth and too loud. "Time for the opening round, let's see who remembers the steps." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Drums shifted to a pulsing rhythm, familiar, fast, playful. The traditional circle dance. "Come on, cousin," Taren said, flashing his usual smile, all charm with an edge of something sharp beneath it. "You've watched it enough times. Time to join in." She took a small step back. "I'm fine just." Kale was suddenly behind her, palm warm and firm against her back. "Don't be shy, flower girl. You've got roots here, don't you?" Laughter surrounded her. The dancers were already forming a ring. Pairs of two, arms linked, steps synchronized. She was pushed toward the circle. Before she could protest, Kale spun her toward Taren, who caught her hand like they were meant to be partners all along. The drumbeat picked up. Taren pulled her into him, gripping her waist just a fraction too tightly, and begun moving to the music, but his steps were just slightly off, subtle enough to throw her balance, just enough to make her second-guess every move. He grinned as she stumbled. Her cheeks burned. They rotated partners. She barely had a breath before Kale replaced Taren, his grip too tight, his smile too wide. "You're doing great," he murmured, like a wild seed caught in the wind. Then came the turn. He spun her hard, deliberately off-tempo where her next partner should have been. There was no one. Just open space. Her feet slipped out from under her. The world tilted. She fell, the breath knocked from her lungs as she hit the packed earth, hands scraped, knees jolted. Silence. She had to get up on her own as there was no hand offered. She was aware of every eye, every smirk trying to mask itself as sympathy, and then the laughter returned. Taren offered a mock bow. "Lost your footing, dear cousin." She stared at the ground, cheeks burning, trying not to let her shame show in the tremble of her hands. She hated this. The way they always made her the joke. The way no one ever stopped it. And then the air shifted. She looked up. Taren walked into the ring, and the mood changed. The laughter faded entirely. Just the weight of his stare, sharp and unrelenting. Eyes turned toward him, then quickly dropped away. His gaze flicked to Kale, then Taren, and something in his jaw tightened. Kale's grin faltered. Taren stiffened. Kale glanced away first, rolling his eyes as if bored by the situation. Only then did Taren kneel beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low and tender. She shook her head quickly. "Don't." His brows drew together. "I just want to help." "I said don't." Her voice cracked, raw at the edges. She backed away from his hand, from the warmth of his presence, from the weight of too many eyes. "Not now. Not like this." She pushed to her feet and turned, brushing dirt from her scraped palms. Her curls had come loose, golden pins littered the ground like fallen leaves. She slipped out of the circle, head down, breath catching in her throat. The firelight faded behind her, swallowed by the trees. She heard footsteps following. He was coming after her. She didn't know if that made it better or worse.
Taren pushed through the edge of the trees, scanning the dark forest, but she was gone. The air still shimmered with the heat of the bonfire, laughter echoing faintly behind him like a cruel reminder. He had seen her face, and it nearly broke him. Sena's wide eyes brimming with pain and fury as she turned and vanished into the dark. He should have followed faster. Shouldn't have let her run alone. But now, the trees were silent. No footsteps. No hint of her presence. Just the aching pull in his chest that felt wrong in a way he didn't understand. With a muttered curse, he turned back toward the clearing. The laughter and clinking of glasses grated now. Kale was still there, near the fire pit, a drink in hand and that ever-present smirk twisting his mouth. Taren lounged beside him. Taren strode across the space, jaw clenched. What the hell was that? Kale raised his brows, mock innocent. A game. You missed the fun. That wasn't fun. That was cruelty. Kale's grin didn't slip, but something sharp glinted in his eyes. You're very passionate for someone who's only just arrived. Careful, outsider. You're picking fights in a house you don't belong to. Taren stepped in closer, voice low and controlled. She's your family. I saw the way you treated her, mocking her in front of everyone, humiliating her like that. Kale's expression darkened, amusement giving way to something colder. She's not family, he spat. My father was forced to keep her because of pity and politics. Half-blood. Or did you not know? Taren's hands curled into fists at his sides. Half-blood or not, she's your cousin and you treat her like dirt. For what reason? Because she doesn't play your games? Kale laughed bitterly. Because she doesn't belong. And neither will you, if you keep chasing after scraps. Taren's eyes flared, but he didn't move. He didn't need to. His disgust was clear. No wonder your house is rotting from the inside. Kale's smirk dropped completely. Without waiting for a response, Taren turned and walked away, blood thundering in his ears. He had never felt anger like this. It roared through him like fire through dry brush, consuming every calm thought. This wasn't just about what they'd done to Sena. It was something deeper. It was the way they laughed when she fell. The way no one moved to help her. The way their eyes slid past her like she was nothing. As if she didn't bleed the same. As if her pain was entertainment. They hadn't just tripped her, they'd humiliated her. Publicly. Deliberately. And when she'd stood there, scraped and breathless, alone in the center of their smug, grinning circle, he'd felt something in his chest snap. Because she hadn't cried. She hadn't shouted. She'd stood up, brushed off the dirt, and held her chin high like she'd spent her whole life surviving moments like this. And maybe she had. That thought gutted him. How long had she been treated like this? How many times had she hidden her hurt behind steady eyes and tight smiles? What kind of family let that happen, encouraged it? His fists clenched at his sides. Muscles tight, jaw locked. He wanted to shout. To throw every one of them to the dirt and ask them what, exactly, they found so funny. But he didn't. Not yet. He stepped into the ring instead, every line of his body carved from fury. And the moment they saw his face, the mood shifted. Laughter died. Taren looked away. Kale's grin slipped. A few others dipped their eyes like prey who'd just realized an alpha fueled by anger had arrived. They felt it. Good. Let them. And somewhere deep inside, something old and golden stirred. He had to find her.
Sena sat beneath the twisted roots of an old pine tree, hugging her knees close to her chest. The crisp night air cooled her flushed cheeks, but it couldn't reach the heat still burning inside her. Her palms were scraped, her pride bruised. The trees whispered above her, soft and indifferent. Their rustling leaves were the only thing that didn't feel like judgment. She didn't cry, she rarely let herself. But there was something sharp behind her eyes, like a splinter she couldn't get out. A pressure that built and built but never quite broke. A twig snapped. She jerked upright, heart leaping. Nico stood just beyond the reach of the moonlight, shadowed beneath the low branches. His expression, as always, was unreadable. Still and silent as stone. "I'm fine," she said quickly, brushing at her skirt, even though the dirt was already ground into the fabric. He didn't move. Just studied her for a long, quiet moment. Then, finally, he stepped forward. His arms were crossed. "You're supposed to be at the festival," his voice low. She looked away. "Why? So they can humiliate me again?" His jaw shifted slightly. "No," he said, almost gently. "Because my father expects to see you." Of course. Always someone else's expectations. Sena nodded, biting the inside of her cheek. "I'll be there." Nico turned as if to go, then hesitated. He glanced back at her, and for the briefest second, something flickered in his eyes, something unsure. Something almost human. "You should put something on those," he said, nodding at her scraped hands. Before she could answer, he disappeared into the trees. But the words lingered behind him like smoke. By the time she returned to the festival grounds, music floated through the trees like smoke, light and lilting, threaded with drums and strings. No one noticed her arrival. That was fine. That was better. She stayed to the edge of the crowd, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes scanning for the brothers, for Taren. She didn't want another confrontation. Not tonight. Then a hand slipped into hers. "Dance with me," Lanny whispered. Sena blinked in surprise, turning to face her cousin. Lanny wore a simple amber dress, hair braided with ivy. She looked calm. "Open? Kind? You don't have to," Sena began. Lanny gave a gentle tug. "I want to. Come on. I'm not letting you stand in the shadows all night. Especially not in that gorgeous dress." Sena allowed herself to be pulled forward. They danced, awkwardly at first, then looser, freer, as the music swept them into laughter. For a while, it was easy to forget everything else. Others joined, laughing and spinning. When someone passed Lanny a cup of chilled elderflower wine, she handed it to Sena with a wink. "Why are you being nice to me tonight?" Sena asked softly. Lanny looked down, then away. "Because I should have said something earlier. And I didn't." Sena said nothing. "I'm sorry," Lanny added. "Sometimes I act like I don't see you because it's easier that way. But it's not right." Sena looked at her, surprised by the honesty. "I see you, Sena," Lanny said. "Even if they don't." They found a bench and fell into quiet conversation, joking, pointing out the worst answers, the most awkward flirtations. Sena let herself smile. But all the while, she kept track of the brothers. And of Taren, who lingered near the fire, always watching. She didn't go near him. Not yet. The music had softened to a hum behind her, woven into the hush of wind and night insects. Sena walked slowly, barefoot now, heels tucked under one arm as her dress whispered against her legs. Lanterns still floated in the trees like sleepy fireflies, their light dimming with the hour. She thought she was alone. But then saw movement ahead and stopped. He stood just beyond the tree line, moonlight spilling over his shoulders, his expression shadowed and unreadable. For a second, neither of them moved. Then he stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his hands loose at his sides. "I was hoping to catch you earlier, but you kept disappearing. It's becoming a very frustrating tradition of sorts between us," he said. Her breath caught. "I didn't mean to," she started, then stopped. "I just needed to get away." He nodded once, not unkindly. "I get it." She crossed her arms tightly over her chest, unsure of what to say or how to stand. Every part of her felt exposed in a way she hated, like he'd seen too much already. "Can we agree to stop running?" a voice asked gently. Sena looked away, the leaves blurring under her lashes. "I didn't want you to see." "See what?" Her throat tightened. "Me? Like that?" There was a pause. A soft inhale. "I saw someone who didn't deserve any of it," he said. "And someone who still stood back up." She looked at him then and saw no judgment in his face. Just quiet, earnest strength, and something else she didn't dare name. "I want to spend time with you," he said. It was a request, not a demand. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her shoes. "You shouldn't." "Probably not," he admitted, and then smiled, a slow, uncertain thing that made her breath catch. "But I still do." She didn't answer. She turned instead, starting down the moonlit path toward the lodges. He walked beside her. They reached a clearing where the moss grew thick and cool beneath their feet. A pine bowed low overhead, its needles catching the moonlight like silver. She stopped. "So, good night," she asked. "Do you want the night to end now?" "No," she admitted, quietly. "But maybe it should be." He reached out, then paused, giving her time to step back. She didn't. His fingers touched hers, warm and rough. Their hands laced together without ceremony. The moment they touched, something shifted. The ground beneath them gave the faintest thrum. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just present. As if the mountain itself had exhaled. Sena felt the pulse run up through the soles of her feet, into her bones, into her chest. Her powers stirred like seeds in warm soil. The moss around them deepened in color. A curl of ivy moved slowly across a nearby stone, leaves turning toward her hand. Taren looked down, then up at her, wonder soft in his voice. "It's you, it's always you." Sena's eyes shimmered green in the moonlight, wide and uncertain. "I don't know what this means. I think we're supposed to find out." She didn't let go. And neither did he. Something ancient shifted beneath them again, quiet and slow and sure. Sena didn't want to move. Not while his hand was still in hers. Not while the night felt suspended between stars and breath. They both turned their heads towards the laughter echoing down the path, loud and careless, a cluster of partygoers weaving their way back from the festival fire towards them. The crunch of gravel and the clink of glasses carried through the trees. Sena stepped back, releasing her hand from his. The energy snapped gently like a thread pulled too tight. She reached up to tuck her hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of the world again. Taren looked at her. "Meet me tomorrow?" She hesitated. "Yes," she whispered. "Where?" "The cliff top," he said. She nodded. "For breakfast?" The voices grew closer. Lantern light flickered down the trail. Sena gave him one last look, something unreadable in her eyes, then turned and disappeared into the shadows. Sena wrapped the still warm cloth tighter around the small bundle of breakfast, honeyed bread, wild berries, and a flask of mint tea as she climbed. The sun had barely begun to rise, pale gold spilling slowly over the jagged peaks like honey drizzled over stone. Shadows stretched long across the valley below, still clinging to the folds of the forest. Mist curled around the treetops, drifting in slow, lazy coils that shimmered like breath made visible. The path was narrow and wild, hemmed in by ferns slick with dew. The soft rustle of Sena's dress brushed against the undergrowth, the sound whisper thin, almost lost beneath the steady crunch of her boots on mossy earth. Occasionally, a twig cracked beneath her step, a sharp punctuation in the hush. Somewhere above, a pine cone dropped with a soft thud. From deeper in the woods came the rhythmic tapping of a woodpecker, like the forest had a heartbeat of its own. A breeze moved through the trees, gentle and cool, lifting the loose strands of hair at her neck. It carried with it the scent of wild herbs crushed underfoot, of damp bark, of something faintly sweet, honey blossom or early berries, she couldn't be sure. The lingering smokiness of last night's festival fire clung faintly in the air, woven in with the earthy perfume of fresh turned soil and sun-warmed pine. As she neared her spot, the morning birdsong stirred in waves around her, chirps, warbles, and trills like the forest was waking slowly and singing itself into life. It was the kind of morning that made everything feel clean, honest. A morning full of promise, whispering of the heat that would rise with the sun, of hours yet to come. She kept walking, breakfast wrapped carefully in her hands, her heart ticking faster with each step, full of questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. She reached the cliff and settled near the edge, brushing dew from the stone. Below, the valley's inhabitants still slept, blanketed in morning mist. Sena laid out a blanket and set the tea down. Then she waited. And waited. At first, it was easy to imagine he was just late. Maybe his father had stopped him. Maybe he'd overslept. But as the sun climbed higher and the shadows shortened, doubt began to unfurl inside her chest like creeping vines. She picked at a berry, then stopped. Her appetite had vanished. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe the touch they'd shared, whatever had stirred beneath their skin, had only been heat and proximity. Maybe, in the sober light of day, he saw her the way the others did. Not just lesser. Wrong? Half? Sena hugged her knees, resting her chin atop them. A small part of her had hoped, stupid, foolish hope, that she might finally be seen. Not the way Nico watched her like she was some mystery to be solved, or the way Kale mocked her, or the way her uncle measured her worth in silence and occasional gifts. But seen. A breeze lifted the edge of the cloth and sent one of the cups of tea rolling sideways. It tipped, spilling into the dirt. She didn't bother to stop it. Sena lingered by the cliff's edge for a while, waiting in the stillness, watching as the golden light of the morning slowly bled into the sky. She glanced down at the path once more, as if expecting him to emerge from the trees, but there was no sign of him. No footfalls, no rustling in the brush. Just the quiet murmur of the wind and the slow, steady pulse of the earth beneath her feet. The weight in her stomach grew heavier. Maybe it was a mistake to come here after all. She finally accepted that he wasn't coming. She swallowed it down and stood, carefully folding the cloth that had held her breakfast. With a last glance at the path leading to the cliff, she turned and made her way back. She had been fooling herself, thinking that there could be something between them. Sena shook her head, swallowing the bitterness rising in her throat. She'd never had the powers her cousins boasted of. Their abilities were powerful, elemental, fierce. They could manipulate the very earth beneath their feet or summon storms with a whisper. But Sena? Hers were faint, like mist drifting through the trees, barely there. She could feel the pulse of nature, the rhythm of the world around her, but it wasn't the same. It was a ghost of what they had. Hers were fragile things, fleeting and elusive. What could she offer a soon-to-be alpha? Her thoughts wandered back to the times when she was younger, to the sneers of her cousins when she couldn't control her gifts. The way they'd whisper behind her back, their laughter carrying through the halls when she was too young to defend herself. They never wanted her near, as if her weakness would cast doubt on their own powers. She grew up without anyone to protect her, to guide her, to just be there for her. Only in the last year did Lanny show any interest in her, but Sena believed this was more to do with Lanny not having anyone of a similar age around her. Their fragile friendship was that of convenience rather than anything else. And soon, Lanny would be gone. Her path would take her down into the valleys, across rivers and over plains, weaving through the vast and varied territories of the Forever People. There, she would live with different families, some who guarded the deep lakes, others who walked the windswept cliffs, and even those who slept beneath the dunes of the western sands. It was her rite of passage, the sacred journey every Forever undertook upon reaching their 22nd year. They were to travel the world, guided only by instinct and the whispers of the land. The journey was both practical and spiritual, a year of learning, of listening. They would train in the skills of their host families, understanding the unique bond each clan held with the elements they served. Ocean dwellers taught the ebb and pull of tides. Mountain tribes shared the secrets of stone and breath. Forest keepers taught how to listen to the old trees and read the light through their leaves. It was during this time that most found their place in the weave of the world. Many, in the end, returned to the kind of terrain they were born into, earth calling to earth, wind to wind. But not all. Some found their soul drawn elsewhere, discovering an unexpected affinity for another element, another rhythm. A rare few discovered something even more life-altering, their bonded partner, waiting on another shore entirely. The rite of passage was not just tradition, it was transformation. A letting go of the child they had been, and the slow, sacred unveiling of who they were meant to become. And so, Lanny would leave, her satchel already half packed with little comforts and gifts from home. Sena knew she would watch her with a quiet ache, that of not having her own rite of passage and wondering if the girl who returned would still be the same. Sena's pace quickened as she emerged from the trees, back into the clearing. She felt him before she saw him. Taren was nearby, his presence brushing against her senses like the softest of winds. She couldn't explain it, but she could feel the direction his energy came from, as if it was something tied to the earth itself. Yet, as always, there was nothing between them but distance. A distance she was growing more and more familiar with. She pushed the thought away. There were only a few days left before the gathering would end, and then she could return to her quiet life. Her simple life. She could go back to being invisible, unnoticed by all the people who had always treated her like a shadow. As the day wore on, she lost herself in the tasks of the festival preparations. Her mind, however, remained tangled in the morning. She kept her head down, did what was expected of her. Her thoughts shifted back to her duties, to the evening that was approaching like an unavoidable storm. She had always been a good niece, quiet and unassuming. She would do what was needed to please her uncle, to make it through the last days of the gathering without drawing attention to herself.
The mountain air had turned still. The sky was brushed in early lavender. A hush had settled over the gathering, only the sound of soft footsteps and the rustling of ceremonial garb as the families moved to the open circle. At the heart of the ancient stone circle stood the Earth Caller, a woman shaped by time and soil. Her frame was slender, wiry with age, yet she stood with quiet strength, as though the roots of the forest itself held her upright. Silver braids, long and heavy, cascaded down her back, threaded with moss, dried petals, and glimmers of bark-polished beads. Each braid told a story, of rains remembered, seeds sown, and seasons turned. Her feet were bare, half sunken into the soft loam, toes curled into the soil as if drawing strength from the deep veins of the earth. She wore no ornament of metal or stone, only a simple dress woven from raw fibers, the color of old lichen and sun-faded bark. Vines coiled around her arms like jewelry, some blooming with delicate white flowers, others dried into brittle spirals, remnants of older seasons clinging to her still. Leaves fluttered from her shoulders like epaulets, caught in the netting of her shawl, a mantle of forest debris, gifted not by hand but by the wind. When she moved, the scent of damp earth and crushed herbs followed her. Her face was lined but ageless, eyes like mossy stones, dark, reflective, and endlessly deep. When she looked at you, it was as though land itself was listening. When she spoke, the ground seemed to still, leaning in to hear her voice. The earth beneath held the hum of something old, something waiting. The elders stood in solemn rows, robes draped in earthen tones, ochres and deep greens, raw linen and bark-dyed wool. Behind them, the younger generations gathered, hushed now after days of feasting and fire. The bonding circle marked the end of the formal part of the annual gathering, the final rite of unity and legacy. Each family stood in formation, their positions dictated by bloodline and standing. The most ancient families stood at the front, closest to the carved altar stone where earth met sky. Taren stood with them, his posture straight despite the weight of so many eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw betraying the unease he'd carried all day. He hadn't made it to the cliffs. His father had roused him early this morning and insisted he attend the gathering of highborn heirs. He hadn't been able to slip away. No chance to send a message. No way to let her know he hadn't chosen to stay away. He'd replayed it endlessly, how she must have waited, how she must have thought he didn't care. Now, as he scanned the crowd, a tightness gripped his chest. There were too many people, rows and rows dressed in ceremonial garb, heads bowed in quiet anticipation, and then he saw her. Near the very back, nearly hidden behind an overgrowth of foxglove and ferns. She was still. Her head was slightly bowed, her hair braided down her back like a rope of shadow. She wore no jewelry, no decoration, only a simple dress of pale brown, its fabric clinging slightly to her form in the mountain breeze. Taren exhaled through his nose, eyes fixed on her. His fingers curled at his sides, the urge to step away from his father and toward her so powerful he had to tense his legs, fixing them in place. The earth caller raised her arms, and a deep breath moved through the crowd, each chest rising as if pulled by the same unseen tide. It began as a fine veil at the edge of the mountains, a mist curling through the trees like a spirit rising from the roots. It shimmered faintly gold as it drifted into the circle, brushing bare skin and drawing startled breaths. Where it touched, warmth followed, the deep thrum of something ancient awakening. A hush swept through the crowd. The earth caller's voice rang out, low and melodic. Before words were spoken, before the first name was carved into stone, there were the forevers. Born not of blood, but of breath and soil and storm. They were the stewards of balance, guardians of the tether between the earth and all who walked upon it. As she spoke, the mist pulsed. The mountains responded. A vibration beneath their feet, like the land humming a song older than memory. Others began to sing, their voices layered in low harmony. The earth caller stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. When bond and earth align, the soul is revealed. When the spirit calls back, the path is lit. The stone underfoot shimmered. Pale golden light began to rise in the space between feet and ground, thin glowing threads, writhing and weaving, sliding toward others of matching resonance. Families linked together. Bloodlines bound. Across the circle, soft gasps rose as thread after thread leapt into place, golden strands mapping old alliances, some thick and bright, others faint and flickering. Then, the brightest thread began to pour out of the center stone. At first, it moved gently, like a curious stream of light seeking its path. The golden thread slithered between the ancient stones, weaving slow and deliberate, as if drawn by a force older than any present. It found Taren's feet and lingered there, wrapping around his ankles with a delicate shimmer, like the earth itself was choosing him. Then, in less than a breath, it surged, striking through the space like lightning, blinding those closest to it momentarily. Exploding outward from Taren with a soundless force. The thread snapped across the space, sharp and searing, cleaving through the gathered energy like lightning through storm clouds. The ripple reaching the far edges of the crowd in an instant. Gasps broke the hush. Eyes blinked against the afterglow. At the front, Taren stood still, golden light flickering at his feet. On the other end, encircled in light, Sena. The gold so bright it pulsed beneath her feet. The entire circle froze. Then a collective gasp. The earth caller's voice faltered. A low murmur spread like fire through dry grass. Taren's eyes locked with Sena's. Her eyes wide, lips parted in silent disbelief. Around her, wildflowers bent toward her skin. The air shimmered faintly near her hands. No one moved. No one breathed. Even the mist stilled, as if holding its breath with the rest of them. Taren stared across the circle at her, stunned. The thread between them pulsed once, like a heartbeat. She didn't move. Then someone whispered, "But, she's a half-blood." The silence shattered into murmurs. But the golden line held. She looked stricken. Taren took half a step forward. He didn't fully understand how the bonds worked, not really. But everyone knew what it meant. The bond had been cast. Something ancient had chosen her. Chosen them. The pull he'd been trying to deny had just declared itself, blinding and golden, to every soul in the mountains. There was no hiding now. Sena's chest rose with a sudden breath and then she turned. She pushed through the crowd, disappearing into the trees before anyone could speak. The thread flickered, and vanished. The silence left behind was sharp. At the front, Rhilor's jaw was tight. His fists clenched. The golden thread faded as he stood heart-thundering, staring at the place she had just been. Whispers fractured the stillness like cracking ice. Impossible. She doesn't have the blood. But the thread, did you see? A sharp murmur of movement. Someone at the back turned to follow where she had fled. Others simply stared in disbelief, their expressions drawn tight with shock or discomfort. Then, from the ring of elders near the altar stone, one stepped forward. Elder Karinith, from the coastal families, tall, white-bearded, his presence commanding. His voice rose above the chaos like a bell ringing through fog. Enough. The whispers halted. A breath held again across the crowd. Karinith's eyes scanned the circle slowly, deliberately. We are in sacred ground. The earth has spoken. You dishonor it with your gossip. Several people dropped their gazes. We will finish the rite, he said, the edge of steel in his voice. With reverence. The earth caller, who had not moved since the golden bond burst through the circle, drew a breath. Her voice came quieter now, but steady. The bonds have been cast. The circle complete. She turned in place, arms still raised. We return to the land our promise this night, the connection endures. We are stewards. The keepers. We walk in balance. Around the circle, voices followed, soft, hesitant at first, then stronger. We walk in balance. Taren spoke the words too, though his voice felt hollow in his throat. His gaze flicked to the place where Sena had stood, his heart still pounding. The thread had vanished, but the imprint of it still felt carved across his chest. The earth caller's eyes brushed over him briefly, just a flicker, but enough for him to drop his eyes and feel his insides twist. The final notes of the chant faded into silence. The air began to shift, energy dissipating like fog burned away by the sun. Families began to move, slowly, uncertainly, stepping back from the circle. No one spoke of what had happened. Not directly. For most this wasn't the first time seeing a bond form, but never with a girl whose bloodline was so tainted. A few muttered farewells. Others peeled away in twos and threes, heading toward the evening's scattered plans, some to rest, other changing before heading out to the forest camp. But the mood was altered now. The ceremony had ended, but the air was thick with what lingered. Taren barely had time to turn before movement rushed toward him. Rhilor, his cheeks flushed, his eyes squinting. What was that? He demanded, spitting the words out. Did you know? Was this some game, some trick? I didn't, Taren shook his head. I didn't know it would happen. I swear. Then another voice, sharp, colder. Of course he didn't. Tanu. He stepped up beside his son, face carved from stone. His jaw tight, his eyes hard on Rhilor. You dare question my son like this? You've humiliated him enough for one day. Rhilor flinched, but held his ground. I didn't do anything. Exactly, his father said, she is your charge, your responsibility. You know well enough that when a bond is declared by the earth you should have stepped forward and given your blessing, he said, but you stood still. Rhilor threw his hands in the air. You expected me to play along as if it was right what happened, his voice raising. It's not natural. Tanu stepped forward, bringing the two men nose to nose, anger punching the air now seething between them. That's enough, came another voice, this one older, steadier. Elder Mira this time, stepping forward from the ring of observers. She gave Rhilor a cool glance, then looked between the faces before her. This is not the place. We do not air these things before the circle. The bond was cast, we will discuss what that means, privately. Behind her, another elder nodded. Take them inside. There was no arguing with an elder. Not here. Not today. Taren looked at his father, but the man refused to catch his eye. He had stood up for him, but Taren knew this was only to save face. The way he stood, slightly angled away from his only son. How he turned, Taren knew he was as disappointed as Sena's uncle. Taren followed, his mind spinning, his father walking stiffly at his side. Behind them, the circle cleared as if nothing had happened. But no one would forget this night.
Sena ran. She didn't know where her feet were taking her, only that she had to escape. The mountain air cut through her lungs, sharp and cold, while jagged stones bit at her soles, but she didn't stop. Branches lashed at her arms, thorns snagged her dress, none of it mattered. She had to get away. Her vision blurred with tears, but the gold thread, that golden line, so bright and undeniable, remained burned in her mind. It had marked her in front of everyone, and Taren's face, his face haunted her with every blink. The horror. The shock. The panic that had twisted his features before he could even speak. It was like a slap. A silent rejection that the whole world had witnessed. She stumbled to a halt near the river's edge, her chest heaving, the fury and heartbreak crashing through her in waves. Her body trembled, shaking as if it might fall apart at any moment. She collapsed onto the moss, curling in on herself as sobs ripped through her, uncontrollable, violent. The bond had been everything. Her way out. Her proof she belonged. And now it was shattered. She didn't hear the footsteps until they were almost upon her. She turned sharply, hastily wiping her face with the back of her hand as Nico emerged from the shadows of the trees. "Sena," he breathed, his voice low and urgent. "I've been looking everywhere. Are you hurt?" She turned away, not wanting him to see her like this. "I want to be alone," her voice raw. His voice dropped, gentle but firm. "You didn't deserve that. Any of it." Her throat tightened. "Please, Nico? Just go." Her words cracked like glass, but still, he didn't move. He knelt beside her, his hand brushing her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he murmured, a tenderness in his tone that caught her off guard. "You don't understand what you mean to me," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't see it. But I do. I love you, Sena." Her breath caught, too stunned to speak, too raw to comprehend. "Nico," her voice barely escaped her lips. He leaned in, his face inches from hers, hesitation flickering like a brief spark of doubt. His eyes searched hers, desperate, hopeful, as if he expected her to close the gap between them. She didn't. Sena shifted back, her hands trembling. "Don't," she whispered, the word soft but firm, a plea. "Please." But Nico didn't stop. His gaze grew distant, like he wasn't really seeing her at all, but imagining something else, a different version of her, one that might want him to. "We could leave tonight," he said, his voice low, urgent, and filled with something unspoken. "You and me. I've thought about it. We don't belong here, not anymore. I can build something with you. A home. Somewhere safe. Just say you'll come with me." "Nico," her voice cracked, the weight of his words crushing her chest. "You never said, never even acted like." "I've been waiting for the right moment," he interrupted quickly. "I saw the way you looked at me too, sometimes. I know there's something. I feel it. I'm not like my brothers. I would never hurt you. You know that, right? Please, say you believe that." She couldn't breathe. The air between them thickened, suffocating, as his hand reached for her cheek. His touch was tentative, almost reverent, but it felt wrong. "No," she said, her voice trembling, stepping back. "I can't." But his hand followed, fingers curling gently behind her neck, pulling her toward him with force. She turned her head, trying to escape, but he continued to pull her toward him. His hand caught the side of her face, gentle but firm, guiding her gaze back to him, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I can protect you," he whispered, breath warm against her skin. "We don't need a golden thread to know what this is." Then he kissed her. His rough lips pressed against hers, insistent, demanding, forcing her mouth open. Sena recoiled, shoving him back with both hands, her heart racing with a surge of panic. Nico stumbled, losing his balance, and fell onto the wet moss and rocks with a grunt. "Don't," her voice shaking, her hands still trembling. "Don't do that." Nico sat up, dazed, confusion clouding his eyes. "I was just trying to." "No," she snapped, her legs weak beneath her. "You don't love me," she said it too sharply, but it was the truth. "You were trying to claim me." Her breath hitched. She forced herself to stand tall, but her body felt like it might give way at any moment. "I don't belong to you, Nico." Without waiting for his response, she turned and ran again, deeper into the trees, away from him, away from the circle, away from everything. The world around her blurred, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The sun hung low, spilling tired gold across the stone paths as Sena trudged back to her quarters. Her limbs felt like they were made of ash, brittle and slow, every step a battle against the weight of what had happened. She had intended to run away, but as the day stretched, she realized she had no choice but to return. Lanny was already inside. She stood in the center of the room with her arms crossed, eyes glancing toward the door the moment it creaked open. Her expression was unreadable, though Sena caught a flicker. Had she been worried? "There you are," she said, and Sena caught the strain behind the words. She started, but Lanny held up a hand. "I was told to wait here. All day. I missed the forest trek. I missed afternoon tea," she sighed, pacing once across the room. "You've got 15 minutes to wash and change. Your uncle wants to see you." Sena blinked. "Now?" "Yes," Lanny snapped, then softer, "He's not in a good mood." Sena didn't ask how Lanny knew. She could guess. She nodded and moved toward the wash basin, her fingers trembling as she unfastened the ties on her dress. Lanny lingered near the door, her gaze on the floor. "I can't believe it really happened," she exclaimed. "The bond?" Sena didn't reply. She didn't have the words. 15 minutes later, dressed in a clean tunic and with damp hair clinging to her shoulders, Sena stood before Rhilor. The room was dim, the shutters drawn against the setting sun. Rhilor leaned against a table, his face shadowed. "You've caused quite the disruption," he said without looking at her. Sena kept her chin high. "You must renounce it." The words struck like stones. "No." He finally met her gaze. "You have your mother's temperament. Did you know that?" Sena's heart clenched, the anger rising in her chest. "How would I?" she retorted, her voice a sharp snap. "You never speak of her." He flinched at her words, a brief flicker of something unrecognizable passing over his face. But he quickly hid it, his lips pressing together into a tight line. The silence that followed thickened, suffocating, as if the air between them had turned to lead. "She deserted me," he said at last, his voice low, heavy with bitterness. "She chose wrong, and now you're repeating her mistakes. I won't let you. Not again." Sena's throat tightened as her own words broke through, raw and fragile. "Why should I?" Her voice cracked. "What is there left for me here? Let me go with him." Her uncle's eyes flashed, the harsh laugh that escaped him rattling the walls around them. "He's already gone, girl. There is nothing left for you, but here." The words hit her like a slap, the sting of them sharp and cold, burning in her chest. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to regain control. She squared her shoulders, the weight of his contempt pressing down on her like a boulder. "Well, if he's gone, then he's broken the bond," she said, each word heavier than the last. "So it doesn't matter what I do, does it?" The flicker of anger in Rhilor's eyes was unmistakable, his nostrils flaring as if he wanted to say more, to break her with his words. But he only narrowed his gaze, his voice a low growl. "Go rest, child. When you are ready to do as you are told, we will talk again." Sena's heart hammered in her chest, the sting of Rhilor's dismissal cutting deeper with each breath, as if the air around her was thickening, suffocating her. As she moved down the corridor, her heart pulsed in her ears, a constant thrum of aching loneliness. She couldn't escape it. The hollow emptiness. Each person she passed turned their eyes away, as if the sight of her was too much. Not a single gaze lingered on her. They didn't look at her, didn't see her. She was bonded. Yet, in this place that should have been her home, she was alone. Utterly, painfully alone.
The valley below his family's estate should have been blooming. By mid-season, the wild grasses usually grew tall and golden, and the hillside trees whispered in harmony with the breeze. But now, everything felt brittle, as though the roots had forgotten how to hold the earth. Taren stood at the edge of the old orchard, boots buried in cracked soil. He pressed his palm against the bark of an alder, trying to listen, to feel. But there was nothing. The pulse he'd always known was faint. Something was wrong. He pulled his hand away, fingers curling into a fist. They had returned in silence. No questions answered. His father hadn't spoken of the bonding circle or the chaos it sparked. The other elders had looked away as if pretending the threat had never existed. And when Taren had tried to speak, his father had cut him down with a glance colder than stone. It had been 3 days. 3 days of watching the sky and feeling the emptiness stretch beneath his skin like a hollow tree trunk. 3 nights, waking in a cold sweat, reaching for something nearby only to find it missing. He hadn't heard from Mount Haven. No message. No whisper. No sign of her. And he couldn't go back. Rhilor had made that clear. The bond was to be renounced, forgotten, buried. There would be consequences if he didn't. But how could he? The earth had spoken, and no matter how much he wanted to, he couldn't turn his back on Sena. Even now, with miles between them, he could feel her, but she was too far, the thread stretched too thin to comfort him. Like the air had grown too thin. Like the sun warmed the mountains but never quite reached his skin. The bond hadn't broken. He knew it. Not in words, but in the way the earth refused to speak, in the way the land turned cold beneath his hands. Whatever had awakened between them, it was still alive. And without it, he was withering.
Days bled into each other like ink and water, soft at the edges and impossible to separate. Sena moved through them like a ghost. She rose each morning not because she wanted to, but because her body had been trained to. She dressed without thought, completed her chores in silence, and retreated to her quarters the moment she could, seeking the only peace she knew, stillness. There, curled in the same corner of the same narrow bed, she let the silence swallow her whole. Sometimes she cried, silent tears sliding over skin that no longer burned with shame or hope, just a dull, dragging weight. Other times, she just lay there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling as the hours crawled past. Sleep came in snatches, restless and thin. The kind that didn't heal. Even though she tried to push him out of her mind, Taren was there, like a thread stitched beneath the fabric of her thoughts, tugging when she least expected it. The look on his face, raw, startled, almost afraid. The way he'd stared across the circle at her as if she were both the answer and the problem. And then nothing. No words. No movement. He hadn't come after her. He was gone. And with him, the only piece of herself that had ever felt whole. But Nico had followed her. The memory of his voice still made her chest twist. The way he'd crouched beside her, gentle and sure, then whispered those words like he'd rehearsed them 1,000 times. We could leave tonight. As if he'd planned it. As if he'd seen something in her she didn't even recognize in herself. She'd always known Nico was quiet, watchful. Different from his brothers. But not like that. Not full of dreams of love and escape. It had shocked her, shaken something loose that was already barely hanging on. And it only made everything more confusing. Because while Nico stood beside her, Taren had vanished. Maybe he had renounced the bond. Maybe it hadn't meant to him what it had meant to her. Maybe Rhilor was right, he'd come to his senses. Seen her for what she truly was. But she didn't believe that. Not fully. Not when she closed her eyes and still felt it, the quiet ache beneath her ribs, the steady awareness of someone missing who had never really belonged to her in the first place. It wasn't a voice or a vision. It wasn't even a sensation. Just a hollow place that hadn't been there before. A stillness between them. A silence where something should have been. Sena turned her back to the mountain. The window she had spent countless hours sitting, looking over the valleys and treetops, no longer offered solace. The peaks, once her silent allies, now felt like judges. Cold. Unyielding. She drew the curtain shut, dimming the room further, then sat cross-legged on the bed, hands knotted in the folds of her dress. She hadn't heard the birds that morning, hadn't noticed the way the breeze shifted, or how the light crept across the floorboards. She simply existed. The door creaked open. Still breathing, Lani stepped in, arms folded, her expression unreadable. Sena offered no reply. Lani closed the door behind her and leaned against it, studying her in the dim light. Her usual sharpness was softened by something Sena saw as pity. "They're still talking about it," Lani said after a moment. "Even the elders can't keep the younger ones from whispering. No one's ever seen a bond like that. Not between someone like you and someone like him." Sena flinched. Lani sighed. "That didn't come out right." "No," Sena said softly, "it came out exactly right." Lani walked to the edge of the bed and sat down beside her. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then, in a gentler voice, Lani asked, "Do you love him? Before the thread?" Sena swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe. I wanted to hate him when he looked at me like that. Like I was a mistake." Lani didn't argue. Outside, voices drifted faintly through the open courtyard. Someone laughed, too loud, too sharp. Sena winced. "I can't even leave this room without someone staring," she muttered. Lani's brow lifted. "Better than being ignored, isn't it?" Sena shook her head. "No. Ignored, I could survive." Sena felt Lani watching her. "Don't," her voice flat. Lani raised her hands in mock surrender. "I wasn't going to say anything." They sat in silence for a while longer, until the shadows stretched long across the room. Eventually, Lani stood. "You should eat something. I'll bring food, but only if you promise not to throw it out the window." Sena offered a ghost of a smile. "No promises." Lani returned near dusk, her arms full of foraged roots and flatbread wrapped in leaves. She set them down with a thump on the small table near the hearth and raised an eyebrow at Sena, who hadn't moved from her spot since morning. "You're going to rot if you keep this up," she said flatly, tearing a piece of bread in half and tossing it at her. Sena caught it clumsily, blinking as though she'd forgotten how food worked. Lani flopped down on the floor beside her and spoke through a mouthful, "You're coming outside with me." "I'm not." "You are. Or I'll drag you." Sena scowled, but Lani was already pulling the curtain open, letting the last of the mountain sun spill in. The courtyard was quiet, most of the families had moved on with their seasonal rituals. The gathering had fractured back into everyday rhythms. No one looked up when the two girls stepped out. Lani spread a blanket on the stone steps and dropped the rest of their dinner between them. "Sit. Eat. Breathe." Sena sat. The bread was dry, but she barely noticed. The breeze stirred her hair, carrying the crisp bite of evening, like cold stone and the last hint of sun-warmed air. Above them, the sky stretched open in streaks of fading rose and bruised violet, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. Her shoulders dropped, a breath leaving her in a slow, quiet rush. Something in her chest loosened, though not enough to call it peace. For a time, they said nothing. Then a voice called Lani's name from somewhere down the slope. She groaned. "If I don't go, they'll send someone. Don't move. If you disappear, I'm blaming you when I get dragged into another elder's circle." She took off down the path, muttering under her breath. Sena sat alone, picking at what was left of the food. Then she stood, unsure what pulled her to her feet, and wandered. Her feet took her through narrow trails and old stone steps. She passed the outer gardens and followed the edge of the trees, where shadows gathered, and the air was rich with loam and decay. It was the first time she'd walked alone since the bonding circle. It was quiet here. The birds didn't sing for her anymore, but the stillness was not empty, it was watching, listening. Something shifted in the underbrush. She paused. A fox stepped out, its coat a russet flame in the dusk. It looked at her. Like it had been waiting. Another movement. Two owls stirred in the branches above, their golden eyes watching as if she were the one out of place. And that's when it broke. The tightness. The hurt. The shame. She slumped onto the ground. Her face crumpled, fists clenched, breath jagged. He left me, the words tumbled out in a whisper, torn from somewhere deep. He didn't even try to find me, he just vanished, like I meant nothing. Her voice shook with fury now. They all look at me like I'm filth. Like the bond was a joke. Like I made it happen, like I stole it. She stared up at the mountains, at the peaks glowing gold in the dying light. You chose me, she hissed. You chose me, and now you've left me with nothing. Her anger burned hotter than shame now, hotter than heartbreak. She could feel it rising, uncontrolled, like floodwater rising over stone. Then a sound, a snap. She turned. Vines were creeping along the forest floor, pushing up through the soil. Slowly, sinuous green lines wrapped around rocks and tree trunks, climbing, tightening. She stumbled back. Her heart thudded. Tiny shoots burst from the earth beneath her feet, unfurling leaves like fingers stretching to touch her. No, she whispered. No, stop. But the vines didn't stop. They twisted around trees, slithering up toward the canopy. Ivy threaded through gaps in the stones. Moss bloomed in quick motion across bark and root. She felt it now, her blood humming in time with the forest's pulse, her body vibrating with the same wild rhythm. The earth was responding to her fury and she didn't know how to make it stop. Her breath came faster, too fast. She stood up watching the vine. She stepped back and a vine followed, sliding along the ground behind her like a loyal animal. Her heart pounded in her ears. No, this isn't happening. She turned and ran, dodging the tendrils snaking through the underbrush, heart hammering as she fled the place she loved most. She reached the safety of her quarters, shoved the door shut behind her, and collapsed against it. Silence. Then a low, curious noise. She looked up to see the fox curled at the foot of her bed again, calm as ever, watching her. Outside her window, the owls had returned. Inside her, the storm had not passed. That night, she didn't light a candle. She didn't need to. The room was threaded with faint green glow, and at the foot of her bed, the fox curled into sleep like it had always belonged there. Sena lay down slowly, eyes fixed on the ceiling, her pulse loud in her ears. She wasn't alone anymore. And that terrified her.
Taren wore the mantle like it didn't fit, because it didn't. Wake early. Train until his muscles screamed. Endure the council meetings, the whispered lectures from his father, the endless scrolls of family lineages and land treaties and brittle alliances that had nothing to do with him, until now. He hadn't been made for this. That had always been Kion's path. Kion, who had walked beside their father like a second spine. Who had spoken with certainty, with vision. Who had understood the weight of legacy and had never flinched beneath it. Taren had been the wild one. The free one. The second son who was allowed to vanish for hours into the trees, to sleep under open skies and come home muddy, grinning, unburdened. To be the son of Tennu was freedom that once tasted like promise. Now, it felt like punishment. Because Kion was gone. And in his place, Taren walked the same halls, sat in the same rooms, tried to hold the same posture, and felt every eye watching not him, but the outline of the brother they wished was still there. He wasn't stepping into Kion's place. He was haunted by it. A ghost wearing his brother's skin. We don't have time, his father kept saying. You don't have time. That was the part that made the least sense. His father, commanding and unyielding as ever, still carried the authority of a leader who had shaped the land with his very presence. The mountain wolves still bowed when he passed. His voice still filled every room, a force in its own right. But when he looked at Taren, it was as if he was watching the sand slip through a glass, counting down the days that hadn't been spoken aloud. Learn faster, he snapped one morning after Taren botched a judgment scenario. You may not get the years I had. He didn't ask how Taren was feeling. Didn't mention the ceremony. Didn't ask about Sena. Or the bond. Or the fact that the earth had chosen her, not him. Just keep moving forward. Taren nodded. Trained harder. Read longer. Spoke less. But the weight of it all settled wrong inside him, like stone pressing against bone, crushing him slowly. Each instruction, Each expectation was like another layer added on top of the others. He wasn't just carrying his father's legacy anymore, he was carrying Keon's too. Some nights, he fell asleep mid-sentence, still clutching scrolls that blurred together in the dim light of his quarters. Other nights, the weight of everything kept him awake, the darkness pressing too hard against his chest. And that's when the dreams came. They came in fragments at first, root systems glowing gold beneath his feet, water rising through moss as if it was alive. Trees groaning in a language he once knew but had forgotten, like a song lost in time. And always, always, a name whispered on the wind. Sena. Sometimes, he saw her clearly, her face so real, her hands reaching toward him across a chasm of stone and shadow. Other times, he only felt her presence, faint, but undeniable, tangled with the scent of moss and fire, her breath like wind in his lungs. It was as if she was calling to him, but there was a distance between them that he couldn't cross. He woke from those dreams gasping, earth under his nails, his skin damp with sweat and soil. A part of him wanted to reach for her, wanted to call out and make everything right again, but the ghost of Keon's absence loomed too large in his mind. He couldn't abandon his duty, not now. Not after everything that had been lost. But how could he not? The moss was soft beneath his back, cool and damp with mountain dew. He lay still, barely breathing, eyes locked on hers. Sena. She was there, only inches away, her face tilted toward his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. A single strand of hair had fallen across her cheek. Her eyes were glassy, lips parted. Then, slowly, tears welled and spilled, tracing the curve of her nose, slipping down her temple into the moss. Taren's breath caught. He reached out, his fingers trembling as they neared her skin, as if to catch a tear before it vanished. But his hand passed through mist. She was gone. Just fog, rolling low and thick across the cliff. Panic surged in his chest. Sena? He pushed up to his knees, heart pounding. Mist swirled around him, dense and disorienting. The edges of the cliff blurred into shadow. He couldn't tell where the stone ended or where the drop began. Sena. No answer. The air felt wrong now. Cold. Hollow. The moss no longer soft, but slick beneath his palms. He rose to his feet too quickly. The ground wavered. He couldn't see. If he moved, he might fall. If he stayed, he might lose her forever. He turned in place, calling her name again, voice cracking. Please. Please come back. The mist surged. And he woke. He woke with his knuckles raw. He didn't remember punching the wall, only the overwhelming need to be there, to find her and have her near to him. He didn't know if she would even want to see him. Had she denounced their bond? No, he felt it still. She hadn't, he knew it. The feeling in his chest was no longer gentle. It pulled like a storm front, tugging his breath, his blood, everything in him eastward. His mother found him staring out the window, already dressed, boots laced. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You're leaving, she said quietly. I have too. She looked at him for a long time. Her eyes softer than his father's, but no less sharp. Then go quickly. Before he tries to stop you. Taren blinked. You know where I'm going? I know where you need to go, she said. I only hope you're not too late. No more waiting. No more silence. He packed what little he needed, shouldered his satchel, and turned toward the mountains. Toward her. Toward the bond that had never really left.
Sena woke with sunlight on her skin. For the first time in days, she felt lighter. The dreams had faded, the heaviness in her limbs had dulled. Maybe, she reasoned, it was just sleep. Real, uninterrupted sleep. She didn't remember what she'd dreamt, but something inside her was quieter. Pulling on a loose wrap and brushing a hand through her tangled hair, she stepped outside. The air was crisp. Somewhere, far off, a bird sang, but even that sounded different. Distant? She made her way toward the dining hall, eager to find Lanny or something hot to drink. The morning sun filtered between the trees, golden and soft, but something felt off. At first, it was just a smell. Faint, acrid. Like burnt rubber or scorched metal, carried on the breeze. Then she noticed the silence. No rustling, no chirping, no fox tracks in the undergrowth. The animals that usually lingered near the path, rabbits, songbirds, the occasional sleepy badger, were gone. She stopped near a bend in the trail and crouched low. The earth smelled wrong. The moss was blackened in patches, curling away from the soil as if recoiling from something beneath. Tiny yellow mushrooms had shriveled, leaving only cracked stems. She touched a root trailing across the path, normally pulsing faintly with warmth, but it felt cold. The hair on the back of her neck prickled. She rose slowly and turned toward the river. The wind had shifted. The air grew sharp. Sharp and unnatural. By the time she reached the lower trail overlooking the water, a crowd had already formed. Elders stood in tight clusters, their expressions grave. A few of the mountain stewards knelt near the riverbank, fingers pressed to soil turned ash gray. The river, normally glowing with faint golden hues where the forever's energy ran strongest, was clouded. Murky? Sena's stomach twisted. Lanny found her there, breathless, a plate of untouched food still in her hands. "They can't stop it," she said softly. "They've tried, songs, earth threads, even a full blessing circle." Sena didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on the earth, on the way the trees nearby had begun to wilt. Even the bark looked sick. "Some say it's the humans," Lanny added under her breath. "That they've been testing things again." On the far side. Quietly. A ranger saw tanks being moved through one of the old lower trails last week. Tanks? Metal ones. With pipes and storage drums. "They're not supposed to come near our lands," but Lanny's voice dropped lower. "Who's watching anymore?" A deep shudder passed through the ground beneath them. Almost like a sigh, long and ragged. The mountain was crying out. Sena didn't speak. She couldn't. She only watched, breath shallow, as the forest she knew began to curl in on itself. The poisoned earth was no longer just a story told to children. It was real. And it was spreading. The pain ran through her, a sharp punch in her gut nearly doubling her over. It rippled through her chest like a cracked drumbeat, sharp and dissonant. Her legs buckled as she reached for Lanny, slipping past her lips. Beside her Lanny groaned. She too curling in herself. The earth's anguish throbbed through the roots, deep and slow, like a pulse gone wrong. Cracks had begun to spread through the lower stone paths, and even the elder trees had taken on a lean, as though flinching from something beneath. Every forever in Mount Haven felt it. As the day progressed, they moved differently, less with grace, more with strain. Some clutched their arms or closed their eyes mid-stride, as if bearing a pain they couldn't name. One woman doubled over beside a well, her skin glowing too brightly, veins of gold flickering wildly along her neck. The earth was crying, and it screamed through them. Sena stood helpless on the edge of the courtyard. She felt it too. The pull beneath her ribs. The ache in the marrow of her bones. But when she stepped forward to help, offering to sing, to carry healing herbs, anything, they gently pushed her aside. "Not now," one said softly, handing her a basket of linens. "We need you to help with the washing." Another pressed a broom into her hands. "Busy work." She wasn't one of them. Not truly. Not enough. The rangers were already preparing to descend into the lower valleys. A scouting party, she overheard. Toward the place where the humans were seen. Where the poison might be leaking. She offered to go, and this time the dismissal wasn't soft. "No. You'll slow them down." The words stung more than they should have. So she left. Without asking, without explaining, she slipped through the side trail past the outer grove and climbed toward the cliffs. The wind was strong up there, sweeping her hair back from her face in cool, persistent gusts. The forest stretched out below like a sleeping animal, bruised and withering in places. But here, on the moss-covered ledge, she could breathe. She dropped to her knees, fingers curling into the soft soil. This was where they had sat. She and Taren. Faces tilted toward each other, unspeaking, sharing a silence deeper than words. That image, half forgotten in dreams, filled her now with something warmer than grief. A memory she could hold onto. The earth beneath her seemed to shift, slightly. She looked down. The moss was brighter here. Green with threads of gold slowly returning to the stems. The vines that had curled around her feet days ago were now delicate shoots, curling softly through the grass. Her heart leapt, but then steadied. She didn't move. Just let it happen. And when the warmth reached her spine, and the breeze kissed her cheeks like a long-lost friend, she closed her eyes and leaned back her head. "Taren," she whispered, voice trembling. She said it again. Louder this time. "Taren." The name left her mouth like breath and song, curling into the wind. The cliff didn't echo. But the wind shifted. Carried it away. Into the sky. Toward him. Somewhere, she knew, he would feel it.
The wind shifted. Taren paused, halfway up the ridge, his breath misting in the cooling air. The trail was steep, slick with last night's rain, but he barely noticed. Something invisible had brushed his skin, like fingers across his cheek. A sound beneath sound. A whisper beneath the wind. Her voice. He stopped in his tracks. Sena, her name trembled on his lips. She wasn't here, but he knew what he'd felt. Deep in his gut. She had called him. Not through magic, not through thought, but through something older, older than even the mountains. He broke into a run. By nightfall, he reached the lower pass at Mount Haven's border. There, torchlight flickered between the trees, movement, voices. A group gathered at the foot of the trail. He slowed as he recognized the dark uniforms of the rangers. One of them looked up sharply. "Taren?" He nodded, out of breath, hand on the trunk of a pine to steady himself. "We heard you were gone." "I'm back." They exchanged glances, uncertain. "What's happening?" The eldest of them, Ranger Delin, stepped forward. His face was hard with concern. "The earth's in pain. A stretch of land near the outer river's turning black. It's spreading. We're investigating reports of human activity, experiments in the valley." "I'm coming with you," Taren said, without hesitation. Delin didn't argue. They set off together, winding through the forest under the faint light of the moons. By midday, they reached a clearing where more figures waited. Nico was among them. Taren barely had time to open his mouth before Nico was on him. "You shouldn't be here." Taren stood still. "I had to come." Nico stepped closer, voice rising. "You left her." "I didn't." "You did," Nico snarled. "You abandoned her. And now you think you can just walk back in and be the savior?" Taren clenched his fists. "You don't know what happened." "No," Nico's eyes glinted. "Then tell me." The others circled warily, tension crackling in the air like static. Taren opened his mouth to answer, but Nico didn't wait. He shoved him. Taren barely stumbled before lunging back, shoulders squaring. Their foreheads cracked together in a brutal headbutt that sent both of them reeling. "Enough," Delin's voice snapped like a whip. Two rangers stepped between them, shoving them apart. "We don't have time for this," Delin growled. "Save your pissing contest for another day." Both young men stepped back, breathing heavily, eyes still locked with fury. "Let's move," the ranger said. They trekked another half-mile before the smell hit them. Chemical. Sharp and wrong. A metallic tang burned their nostrils. The underbrush thinned, and there, nestled in what was once a sacred grove, stood a human facility. Low buildings, plastic piping, crates marked with warning signs. A slow, viscous ooze leaked from one of the drums, soaking into the soil like venom. The vines nearby were shriveling. "The water flows from here straight to the valley," one ranger whispered. Taren stared in horror.
Sena woke before sunrise, heart pounding. Something had changed again. She sat up slowly, the woven blanket falling from her shoulders. The air around her was charged, like the hush before a storm. Her fingertips buzzed with the pulse of the earth, not frantic like before, but taut, strained. She pulled on boots and stepped outside. Barefoot would have been too dangerous now. Even the grass here was beginning to wilt. The sky was streaked with soft orange and bruised blue clouds. She wandered the paths near the outer lodge until she heard voices up ahead, urgent, hushed, familiar. She froze just beyond the tree line. The rangers were back. Delin's tall form strode into the open courtyard, followed closely by the others. Behind them, two figures trailed at a slight distance. One of them stopped. Looked toward the trees. Her breath caught. Taren. He was here. She couldn't see his face from where she stood, hidden in the shadows, but her body reacted as if a string had been pulled tight in her chest. She felt the invisible thread weave across the earth, stretching closer to him again. Her feet took a step forward, then stopped as a shout echoed from the lodge. "Gather the elders." The alarm had been raised. The courtyard filled quickly with forevers, their faces pale, skin glowing with unease. Many clutched themselves, holding the agony within. The pain leaking through the land. One older woman had tears running down her cheeks, and when asked, she simply whispered, "The river. She's gone quiet." Sena moved around the edge of the gathering, staying just out of sight, listening. Taren stood before the elders, face grim. "The humans have set up a chemical facility just beyond the boundary. It's leaking into the ground. Into our ground." A low murmur. Anger. Fear. One of the Earth Watchers muttered. They swore their industry would stay west of the mountains. The head elder, a white-haired man with bark-colored skin and luminous green eyes, raised a hand. "We must act. If the land rots, we rot too." Every elder, every ranger, every gifted forever who held sway over the elements was there dressed in heavy traveling robes. The air was thick with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes, charged, metallic. A storm without clouds. "The corruption spreads faster each day," said Elder Maros. "The river smells of ash." Beneath the trees, the air was sharp with the tang of smoke and something chemical, acrid and unnatural. It clung to the tongue, bitter as burnt bark. "Even the owls have gone," another whispered. "They've nested here for decades." "The humans must be driven out," Rhilor declared. "Before the land dies entirely." A low murmur of agreement rolled through the grove like distant thunder. "They won't listen to warnings," Taren added. "But they'll listen to fear." The oldest of the group, a woman with skin like honeyed birch and golden etchings coiled around her arms, nodded slowly. "Then we make them afraid. We bend their minds as the wind bends branches. Let them see disaster before it strikes. Let them believe their machines are cursed." A hush followed, heavy as snowfall. Someone asked, "Can we do it in time?" "We must," the head elder said. "We do it together. All of us." "And the girl?" someone asked, eyes flicking toward Sena. "She stays out of it," Rhilor's voice rang clear from the rear steps. "She's untrained. She'll only make things worse." Sena felt the insult land like a stone in her stomach but chose to ignore his words. She searched the circle of faces until her gaze rested on his. Taren stood there, silent, eyes cast to the ground. The space between them stretched like a void. Her heart ached. She turned and walked away, her breath catching on the back of her tongue. She didn't notice the wind shifting around her, or the thin green sprouts that followed behind her feet, curling in quiet defiance. She stood alone as the procession moved into the woods. One after another, the glowing forms of her people disappeared into the trees, their presence dimming like stars swallowed by dawn. And then she was alone. The silence was unbearable. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. Back inside the lodge, everything felt too still. The hearth was cold. Even the animals that had once nestled near her had gone. Their absence echoed louder than footsteps on stone. She sat on the stone step outside, knees hugged to her chest, waiting. The sky dimmed, clouds pressed low and heavy, cloaking the peaks. The air turned damp and metallic. Time stretched like molasses, slow and sticky, and still no one returned. She pressed her palm to the ground. The soil was cool and rough beneath her skin. It trembled faintly, not in pain, but in anticipation. Like a breath held just before a scream. Something was coming. Time passed agonizingly slowly. Sena found herself back on the steps of the patio that looked over the mountains, watching the space where the others had disappeared into. Her thoughts were a tight coil, looping endlessly. What if they didn't return? What if something had gone wrong? What if he? She shook her head sharply, trying to dislodge the spiraling thoughts. The sun crawled higher, brushing the mountaintops in gold, but it brought no warmth. Only stillness. Only silence. By the time it hung overhead, blazing in a sky scrubbed pale, her limbs were stiff, her fingers numb. Her heart was a restless drumbeat against her ribs. Enough. She stood abruptly, ignoring the stiffness in her joints. She couldn't sit here any longer, waiting like a wilted thing. If no one would tell her what was happening, she would find out herself. The forest greeted her like a forgotten path. Ferns brushed against her legs, and leaves whispered above like gossiping spirits. She followed no trail, only the pull in her chest, the same one that had led her to the cliff the day Taren was taken from her. Halfway down the slope, she saw movement through the trees. 3 elder women sat in a patch of dappled light, their shoulders slumped, faces slack with exhaustion. Their skin glistened with sweat, smudged with grime. Clothes torn, hands trembling. They looked like they had clawed their way through the mountain. One woman lifted her head as Sena approached. Her eyes were distant, her voice barely a rasp. "The battle still goes," she murmured. We came back to regain our strength." Sena opened her mouth, but the question never came. The woman dropped her gaze again, and it was clear, there were no answers here. Only weariness. Only the ache of power drained too far. She kept walking. The pull in her chest grew stronger, urgent now, dragging her past twisted roots and leaning trees. Her boots slid in loose earth. Branches tugged at her hair. But still, she moved forward. She didn't know where she was going. Only that she had to go. Hours passed. Her legs ached, her breath grew shallow, her mind fogged. She pressed on until she could go no farther and finally sank to the ground beneath a great pine. Bark pressed rough against her spine, the air thick with the scent of sap and moss. The silence wrapped around her again. And then, a crunch of leaves. A shift in the air. She looked up. And there he was. Staggering from the trees, his shirt torn, face streaked with blood, dirt and bruises bloomed across his collarbone like dark flowers. His hair was matted, his eyes wild. He saw her, and froze. For one long heartbeat, neither spoke. The world held its breath. Then she whispered, "What happened?" Taren opened his mouth. But before he could answer, the wind shifted, and something deeper than words moved in the trees behind him. Taren stumbled forward, and before she could speak again, he collapsed, straight into her arms. Sena caught him with a grunt, the weight of him startling but not unwelcome. He smelled of smoke and iron, his skin clammy beneath the blood and sweat. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his eyes fluttered closed. "Taren," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. She knelt with him cradled awkwardly in her lap, heart pounding, mind whirling. She couldn't carry him. Not this far. Not alone. Help, she thought. She didn't say it aloud, there wasn't time, no voice left, but something within her reached outward, into the forest, into the silence between things. The air changed. A tremor rustled through the trees, and from the misted woods stepped a great male deer. His antlers were wide as tree limbs, moss trailing from their points, eyes deep in gold. He lowered his head, as if bowing. Sena's breath caught. "Thank you," she whispered. With care, she guided Taren onto the deer's back, her hands trembling. The creature didn't flinch. It turned and began walking, unhurried but sure, as if it had done this 1,000 times before. Sena walked beside him, one hand lightly on Taren's arm. The forest seemed to hush around them, the breeze a lullaby, the path cleared of stone and briar. Time folded around the 3 of them. When they reached the lodge, the deer paused long enough for her to pull Taren down. He was still half conscious, murmuring something she couldn't make out. She guided him to her room, shoulders burning with the strain, and laid him gently on her bed. Moments later, a soft knock at the door. It was one of the old women, the same who had been resting in the woods. She looked more alert now, carrying a small leather satchel and a bowl of water. Without a word, she entered, nodded, and began to work. Taren didn't stir. Sena helped as best she could, fetching towels, lighting a lamp. When the old woman peeled off his torn shirt and trousers, Sena turned sharply away, cheeks burning. She had never seen a man like that before, half-clothed. His bare chest rose and fell in a shallow rhythm, his skin marked with deep scratches and blooming welts. But beneath the wounds, faint golden patterns shimmered across his skin, like tattoos made of light, winding over his ribs and collarbones in intricate, vine-like designs. Each line pulsed softly, as if breathing with him. They were beautiful, otherworldly, and utterly unique. No two forevers bore the same markings. Like fingerprints woven by the earth itself. There was something so real about him in that moment, vulnerable, unguarded, and still impossibly sacred. She had to swallow hard to keep from crying. The work was silent. They dressed wounds, rubbed balms, cooled his fevered skin. By the time they were finished, night had gathered thick and blue outside her window. The woman stood with a groan, one hand pressed to the small of her back as she straightened, joints cracking in protest. She rolled her shoulders once before, walking out onto the terrace just beyond Sena's door. Sena followed, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, grateful for the cool air against her flushed face. The evening air was sharp and bracing, raising goosebumps on her skin, but she welcomed it. It was the only thing that didn't ache. They sat side by side in silence, the stars above barely visible behind the clouds. Then the old woman spoke. "I knew your mother." Sena's head snapped toward her. She was one of the brightest I'd ever seen. Graceful, like a hawk in flight. Her gift with the land people came just to learn from her. She was admired. Envied even. Sena blinked hard. "That doesn't sound like me." The woman chuckled gently. "No. But it should. You look just like her. Especially when you're angry." Sena looked away, biting her lip. "Rhilor sees it, too," the woman continued. "That's why he can't look at you sometimes. It's not hate, child. It's memory. It hurts him." Silence fell again. The breeze shifted the trees, and the sound of owls called from far off. "My father?" Sena asked quietly. "Do you know who he was?" The old woman's expression grew sad. She shook her head. "No one did. Your mother went on a journey, to the borderlands. When she returned, she was pregnant. Wouldn't name the man, not even to her brother. Not until the very end, and even then, just one word." Sena waited, heart pounding. "Human." The word settled like frost. She said nothing more. Just that she loved him. And then the birth came. And she was gone. Sena stared at her hands. "Why does everyone hate me so much?" The woman didn't answer. Not for a long time. Finally, she sighed. "I don't think they do. But people fear what they don't understand. And you, Sena, were born of two worlds. That's never easy." Sena nodded slowly, eyes burning. Inside, Taren stirred faintly in her bed. Outside, the wind whispered through the branches. And far below, the forest held its breath. The quiet was shattered by the sudden crack of the door slamming open. Taren jolted where he lay, but it was Sena who shot to her feet first. Alpha Tinu stood in the doorway, flanked by two broad-shouldered men in dark leathers. His presence filled the small room like a thunderstorm rolling in. Behind him, others spilled into the hall, Rhilor, his sons, and several others from both clans. The tension was instant, thick as smoke. Nico pushed to the front. His face flushed with fury. His eyes darted to the bed, Taren, bloodied and half-naked unconscious, lying in her bed, and then to her. His jaw tightened. "What is the meaning of this?" Alpha Tinu barked, eyes locked on Sena. Sena took a breath to respond, but before she could, the old woman beside her stood, brushing her hands off calmly on her tunic. She didn't flinch at the power in the room. "You barge in like wild boars," she said dryly, "and for what? To accuse the girl who saved your son?" Tinu blinked, as if he hadn't even seen her until now. "He stumbled out of the forest half dead," the woman continued, her voice rising. "She carried him back. She healed him. You should be grateful instead of hollering like a spoiled pup." One of the guards shifted awkwardly. Even Rhilor said nothing. "She's a girl," Nico snapped, stepping forward. She shouldn't be alone with." The woman turned sharply on him. "And yet she was. And yet he's alive. Perhaps she's more than you think." Tenu's jaw tightened, but he gave a curt nod. He'll be moved. Now. He signaled his men forward. Sena hesitated, heart pounding, unsure if she should stop them, but what could she do? The men approached the bed carefully, reaching down to lift Taren between them. Sena, the word was raw, hoarse. His eyes had fluttered open, and he searched the room until they found her. He reached for her weakly, his arm barely lifting from where it lay. Don't go. Sena stepped forward, breath caught somewhere between her chest and throat. His hand grazed hers before he slipped under again, the strain too much. Alpha Tenu's face was unreadable. He looked at his son, then at Sena. Finally, he turned to his men. Take him to the guest wing. Leave word if he wakes. Without another word, they moved out, the others slowly filing away in awkward silence. Nico lingered longest, his eyes still burning at her, a silent accusation. Then he, too, was gone. The door clicked shut behind them. Sena stood alone in the space they left behind, her hand still tingling where Taren had touched her. The bed was empty now. Her room felt colder, somehow. Quieter. The old woman touched her shoulder gently. You'll need rest too, child. There's more coming. You'll want to be ready. But Sena wasn't sure what she was meant to be ready for. She only knew this: the mountain was stirring again. And her place in it was no longer on the edges. Taren stirred as dawn crept over Mount Haven, light filtering through the latticed windows of the guest wing. He moved too quickly, regret flaring through his ribs, and let out a low groan. A hand touched his shoulder, firm and gentle all at once. Sena. She sat by his bed, curled in a shawl, eyes dark from too many sleepless nights. Her hand withdrew the second his eyes opened fully. You're awake, she said softly. He nodded, then winced. I feel like I wrestled the mountain. You nearly did. They didn't speak for a moment. Sena shifted, rising from the chair beside the bed. Slowly, almost without meaning to, she sank to her knees at his side. The motion sent a quiet ache through her bones, a reminder of days spent bent and bruised by grief and work. But here, now, she couldn't look at him from a distance anymore. She needed to be close to him. He turned his head toward her, his face still drawn with exhaustion, and reached for her hand. This time, she didn't pull away. I never broke the bond, Sena. Her breath caught. I didn't say the words, he whispered. I couldn't. They asked me to, my father insisted, but I couldn't do it. She stared at him, stunned by the quiet conviction in his voice. His fingers threaded with hers, calloused and steady. She squeezed his hand, just once. Her other hand rose before she could stop it, brushing a bit of hair from his forehead. He leaned into her touch, barely, and their faces drew closer. His gaze dropped to her lips. Her heart thundered. She swayed slightly forward, close enough now to feel the heat of him, the way his breath hitched in his chest. Her lips parted, her whole body aching, wanting to be closer to him. A sharp knock rattled the door. They froze. The door creaked open. Lanny stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. The council is meeting. Sena pulled away and Taren exhaled a low breath and sat up with effort, his fingers slipping from hers. Of course they are. The meeting was held beneath the wide pergola that crowned the eastern hill, a massive circular structure of carved stone and open beams draped in hanging vines. The view stretched across the valley below, but no one was admiring the scenery. Low voices drifted like wind through dry grass, a hush of tension beneath the canopy. Elders filled the stone benches, family heads clustered in shadows, stewards lined the edges. The air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and earth. Sena lingered near the back, half hidden behind a thick wooden column. She hadn't been invited to speak, again, but her presence clung like static. Everyone felt it. The earth caller stepped into the open circle, her long braids swaying like weighted vines. The factory has been emptied, she said. The humans have left. Their damage was real, but now it has been purged. A quiet wave of nods followed. Tension lessened, just a breath. Then why hasn't the land healed? Someone asked. A gruff elder muttered, perhaps the damage was too deep. No, another said, perhaps there's another site. Another factory. There were whispers of movement to the south, someone added. Or we were too late, said a woman near the outer circle. Perhaps the land is punishing us, not for what we did, but for what we didn't do. A silence fell like a stone in a still pond. Then Rhilor stood. His voice cut through the hush. The imbalance began during the bonding circle. Perhaps that's where the wound lies. Spines stiffened. Heads turned. Some looked at Taren. Others, many, turned toward Sena. Are you suggesting they are the cause? A woman asked, her tone sharp. I'm suggesting, Rhilor said, slow and deliberate, that the timing is too precise to be coincidence. Murmurs rippled through the gathering like rising wind. The bond came from the mountain, one voice argued. We all saw it. And yet nothing has been the same since, Rhilor countered. Taren rose, every movement deliberate. She is my mate, he said. Chosen by the land. Not by me. Not by her. By the mountain itself. Even if that's true, Rhilor said, perhaps the mountain made a mistake. The circle fractured. Voices erupted. Shouts clashed like clanging bells. She should never have been brought here. She belongs more than some of us ever have. It's the bond, pulling at the roots. It's you. You let the poison in, the earth caller tried to speak, but the crowd drowned her. And Sena stood still in the storm trying to steady her breath. Her skin buzzed. The ground beneath her feet felt like it was vibrating. A high ringing started in her ears. Her breath came faster, shallow and sharp. Her mouth tasted of metal. She tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. The heat of so many eyes on her burned against her skin. Their words came like stones hurled at her chest. If you cared for him, you'd break the bond. She doesn't even belong here. It's not her fault. She's always been a disruption. Taren's voice broke through the clamor, Sena. She turned toward him, but everything was blurred now. The world spun. The floor tilted beneath her feet. Her knees trembled. The sky above the pergola seemed to stretch and sway. A sharp, clear voice rang out. Look at her feet. Everything stopped. The crowd turned. The old woman, the one who had told Sena about her mother, stepped forward, eyes wide and shining. Look at her feet, she repeated, louder now. Sena blinked, struggling to focus. Then she looked down. From the dirt beneath her boots, a thin layer of vivid green grass was spreading, fast and wild. Vines curled up from between the stones, wrapping around her ankles like silk ropes. Tiny blossoms unfurled with a shiver of color, bright against the dust. She doesn't suppress the land, the old woman said. She awakens it. Mouths fell open. Even the earth caller stepped closer. You say she has no power, the old woman continued, voice ringing clear, but she was never taught. Never trained. You didn't test her, you silenced her. Rhilor's face darkened. His jaw clenched. She said her father was human, someone muttered. Did anyone check? The old woman snapped. Or did you just take a grieving girl at her last whispered breath? The gathering fell to silence again. Sena felt it, all of it. The eyes. The doubt. The awe. Sena backed away from them, almost stumbling back down the stone steps. She continued moving, her eyes on them as she crossed the moss-lined lawn. Voices called out, telling her not to run again, to stay, to listen, some urgent, some alarmed. But she couldn't hear them anymore. She heard the earth. It roared in her ears, silencing every other sound. The trees leaned as she passed, branches bowing low, leaves shivering in agitation. Vines filled from the underbrush like serpents, curling in the wake of her flight. Grass thickened behind each step, and blossoms opened in rapid bursts like sparks trailing her heels. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with a golden light bleeding from her skin. Her fingertips burned. Her jaw clenched. Something broke within her, she felt it fall away, and, in its place, she felt a strange power nestled in her chest, slowly expanding. The sky above seemed to split, clouds rolling like waves. A low tremor rippled through the mountain, distant at first, then closer. Stronger. A crack in the forest path opened in front of her, and she jumped without hesitation. The roots below shifted, catching her weight, then lowering her gently back to the ground. She didn't notice the people following her. But when one of them, Nico, breathless and flushed, reached out to stop her, she turned sharply and flung a hand toward him. A wall of hedges burst from the ground between them. Thick and thorned, tall as the lodge itself. Nico and the others behind him were thrown back with a crash of twisting limbs and startled cries. Her mouth dropped open. What have I done? The thought struck her like a stone to the chest. Panic seized her before she could breathe through it. Her skin flushed hot, then cold, like every nerve had turned traitor. Without thinking, she spun away, bare feet scraping against the terrace stone, and fled into the night. The mountain wind whipped at her hair, biting at her arms as she pushed forward blindly, heart pounding so hard it made her vision swim. She moved on instinct, legs burning, needing as much distance as her aching lungs would allow. Down the narrow path. Past the silent watchlights. Over the scattered gravel that cut at her soles. She didn't stop until the trees thinned, the path turned to craggy rock, and the land dropped suddenly away beneath her. The cliff. She stumbled to a halt at its edge, breath heaving, knees trembling. The valley stretched below, dark and endless, the stars above flickering like they were watching her. She pressed a hand to her chest. It did nothing to steady the fractured rhythm inside. Her thoughts were everywhere, scattered and impossible to gather. His voice in her mind, I never broke the bond. His eyes, so close to hers. The warmth of his hand. The way she'd leaned toward him. She almost let it happen. She wanted to let it happen. That was the worst of it. Sena wrapped her arms around herself and stared into the black. How had she gotten here again? How had it all slipped so far out of her hands? She stumbled forward to the edge and dropped to her knees, hands pressed into the soil. Her magic poured out of her, unfiltered. Trees bent low, trunks groaning. Rocks cracked. Birds cried warnings from above. The mountain responded to her, and it was terrified. Sena gasped, chest heaving. I don't want to hurt anything. But the storm inside her had no more patience for denial. Then, through the shifting air, the rising heat, footsteps. Soft? Steady. Known. Taren stepped through the trees. His cloak was gone. His face pale, hair damp with sweat. Scratches still lingered along his jaw, and one hand was bandaged. He didn't hesitate. The others remained behind him, keeping their distance. But he walked toward her and she stood to meet him. Sena, he called, gently. She turned, wild-eyed. Don't come closer. I have to. You'll get hurt. Then let me. She looked at him. Her lips trembled. I can't stop it, Taren. You don't have to, he said, pausing just a few feet away. You were never meant to carry it alone. She faltered. Her knees buckled. He caught her. She felt his arms wrap around her, as he pulled her close. She rested her head on his shoulder and sobbed, her body shaking in his arms. He held her, whispering soothing words until she was able to look up at him. He cupped her face, their foreheads pressing together. I see you, he whispered, their eyes shone bright gold. The wind howled. The mountain quaked. And then he kissed her. The world ignited. Not in fire, but in light. Golden and green, spiraling out from where they stood. The rocks settled. The trees flourished, and the mountain sighed. And the power flowing from her, once chaotic, now calmed, strengthening inward, balancing her. She kissed him back, and between kisses, they whispered the words that cemented them to each other. I see you. I choose you. I am yours. And the land heard them. And the land healed. Epilogue. 1 year later. The sun rose slow and golden across Stone Oak Ridge, slipping through the high canopy in soft ribbons of light. The mountain exhaled in birdsong and the chatter of spring water flowing freely through once poisoned streams. Even the rocks looked warmer in the morning light. Midway down the mountain, the Tinu lodge stood nestled in a cradle of ancient trees, its stone paths already swept clean, its terraces bright with blooms. The annual gathering of the Forevers would begin at noon, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Sena knelt just beyond the western terrace, fingers buried in the soil, coaxing a patch of wild thyme into bloom. The scent curled around her like memory, sweet, earthy, strong. A red fox lay curled near her boots, twitching in sleep, while a pair of doves watched from a branch above. She no longer asked the land for permission. She simply asked what it needed. Behind her, boot steps crunched softly on the stone path. She didn't turn. "You always find the best view," Taren said, setting down a small basket beside her. "I don't find it," she replied with a small smile, "it finds me." He knelt beside her, pulling free 2 slices of honeyed flatbread and a folded napkin filled with bright forest fruit. Their hands brushed as they reached, and neither pulled away. "You've got moss in your braid," he said, plucking it free. "You have flour on your nose." Taren grinned. "I'm the future alpha, I'm allowed." "Not yet, you're not." He reached out as she stood, steadying her with one hand beneath hers, the other brushing gently across her rounded belly. His thumb lingered there, a quiet gesture full of wonder. "Everything ready?" he asked, his voice husky as he took her in. She looked out across the terrace, where the stream now ran clear and the wildflowers bloomed without coaxing. "It is now." They stood in silence for a while, watching the wind ripple through the trees. Far below, families gathered for the spring rites, children dancing between wildflowers, elders singing the low songs that told stories to the soil. Taren leaned into her shoulder, voice quieter. "Do you think they'll ever stop looking at us like we rewrote the rules?" She tilted her head against his. "We didn't rewrite them. We just reminded everyone they weren't written in stone." He smiled, soft and full. Then, without needing to ask, he laced his fingers through hers. For a moment, they just breathed together, shoulder to shoulder, bound not just by magic or the mountain, but by something deeper. Something that had taken root long ago and grown steady, strong, and true. Taren turned to her, brushing a strand of windblown hair from her cheek. "I'd still choose you," he whispered. She leaned in. "Good. Because I'm not letting you go." Their kiss was unhurried, quiet and sure, as the trees rustled in approval and sunlight spilled through the branches like a blessing. Not chosen. Grown. And still growing.